podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. And the end of the season, Logan, people start to be a little more forthcoming with their answers on certain topics. And Jahan Dotson was asked yesterday by Scott Abraham about the culture in the Commanders' locker room. And here's how that went.
You're in between the lines. What do you think this team needs going forward next year to kind of get more wins, get over the hump?
I would say as far as players, just a sense of culture. We got to have a mindset in here that we want change. We can't just accept this type of stuff because this is really hard on a lot of people. And I know a lot of people come from winning backgrounds, so we got to bring that stuff in here. We can't accept anything but winning, honestly, and that starts with us players, no matter who the coaches are. It starts with us. We gotta bring our best foot and make sure that we go out every Sunday and bring it.
When you say culture, is that on the players, or do the coaches feed into that?
I feel like it's everyone, but I feel like the best teams that you see in any sport are player-led. Your captains, they step up. And everyone really follows because when you're surrounded by guys who are hungry and want to win, it trickles down. It's a domino effect. So I feel like that's where we can start.
That audio courtesy of ABC7. Logan, you hear that? I certainly have a lot of thoughts, shared some of them on the radio already, but we'll rehash some of what I think here. But first, I'd be curious what you think when you hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's one of those comments where I think he's trying to take a personal accountability. He's kind of saying it's on the players, and a good player will do that. But I think obviously Scott and the rest of the media is like drawing maybe a correlation to some other things, other factors when it comes to leadership and building a culture. And what I will say is like culture is a funny word. It's like so ambiguous and it's very hard to kind of define. I think, Jahan alluded to like perhaps developing a winning culture, and I think like I've been a part of teams that have been led in both ways. Obviously the teams in 2010, 11, 12, I think were very player led teams. Obviously you had one of the most dynamic leaders that I ever played with in London Fletcher. And I think Mike deserves a lot of credit for kind of empowering the right people and encouraging that type of leadership, obviously. And Fletch was fantastic. And it was an older team. And all those older guys were really good pros. They set good examples for the young guys. Lorenzo Alexander, obviously, Kedrick Golson, Reed Doughty, really high character guys, really high character locker room that could tolerate, that would not tolerate certain things. And as a result, like, I think I would characterize that as a team that was very player led and player driven. Then I go to a team like Atlanta, where Dan Quinn had developed this tremendous culture in the building and this tremendous kind of work environment that was awesome. But then the continuity of the players was a very young team. They didn't have a lot of maturity. And the older players at the time, Matt Ryan, while being a very dynamic leader offensively, was having a hard time relating to the younger population at that point in his career. So obviously, I think people want to say, oh, it's the players, it's the coaches, but it's really the dynamic between the two. And I think it's crazy in the NFL how dramatically that can change in year to year, because like the roster turnover is so crazy. So I think people are going to make a lot of this soundbite, and I kind of understand why to a certain extent, but I think that ultimately I agree with what he's saying. Like, this is a player thing. Like, and when you look at this situation specifically, like, we don't know if it's for sure. We all anticipate big changes in terms of coaching staff, but players are kind of the lifeblood of the organization, especially players like John and Duran. Players are going to be here for a long time. So their leadership is going to be extremely important. I don't think Jahan's being critical of them necessarily, but I do think he's calling attention to something that he'd like to see change.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting when he mentioned specifically the captains, and I don't know the relationship between he and Terry, Terry is obviously in his room, so the relationship there is going to be more important for him as a fellow wide receiver. But obviously, John is kind of one of the key voices, if not the key voice in the room. And when you talk about that relationship between players and coaches, one of the things that I wonder about, and this is, I'm going to be very clear here. There are times that I know things and I wink nod and I'm like, I wonder, hey, I don't know anything here. This is me purely speculating, just kind of watching what has happened. and not even speculating, me truly like wondering. Like, John is a guy that I remember after his rookie year, the way he answered questions at the end on like locker cleanout day. I remember going on the Junkies the day after going, I don't care what they do this offseason. If they don't put a C on that guy's chest, they've made a mistake. Like, he is so important with how he thinks about the game and winning and all this kind of stuff. Still pretty fresh off Nick Saban school and all of that. And you watch how Chase and Montez, but really Chase, emerged as a very loud voice in the same room and not necessarily always in a constructive way. And I just wonder if John kind of felt like sick of it and neutered to an extent, and that undercut his voice as someone who was trying to lead in a certain direction, and maybe there was some tension pulling in opposite directions. And that can happen within a locker room, and sometimes it can be healthy, but obviously in this particular case, it certainly hasn't been healthy enough to produce wins. It doesn't feel like, based off the comments coming out and some of the things that we've heard, that the culture is great in that locker room. And I do wonder, being a little hands-off, or perhaps too hands-off if you're Ron, did you allow the wrong voices? Because you talk about how Mike did a really good job of making sure that Fletch was the guy that was heard. And so the way I would look at it on a big picture scale is this. I think that you need to have the illusion of being player-led. It's actually not. It starts at the very top of the organization of having a clear vision for what you want, empowering the right people. And if you don't have them, bringing in the right people, and then making sure that the standard is set to a point that they're enforcing your standard. And so maybe as a coach or an executive, you don't have to be the enforcer of the culture, but you do need to set it. And I don't know that was done particularly well over the 4 years that Ron was here. And there could be a variety of reasons, from disharmony on the coaching staff itself, and some lack of continuity and lack of communication, which we've talked about in the past, different visions. And it could be big things or little things, different visions of, like, it seemed like Ron and Scott had different visions of the offense. And this year, the coordinator they bring in didn't really seem to match the way they built the team. And so there's these points of friction that makes it really hard for players to even understand what they want the culture to be and what they want the kind of messaging and thought processes to be in the first place. And so, again, I go back to that phrase, like the illusion of player-led, but it's actually because they're just enforcing something where everyone's all on the same page from top to bottom of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if obviously in this situation, I don't disagree with the way you characterize that. There does seem to be a little bit of, friction's a good word, between kind of the vision of certain members of the staff and I've had conversations where it's like, oh, this person wasn't coaching this the way we wanted it to be coached, and blah, 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 blah. Right. And that does affect the ability for the players to play good football. And I ultimately think it's important to note that, like, good culture and winning culture, like, they're really closely connected, right? So I think back to, like, the Dan Quinn example, and like I said, he's got a great culture. It was awesome to come to work. Really enjoyed the environment there, right? But they weren't winning, and it really negatively impacted the buy-in to that, right?
Right.
So I think, like, even even with Mike, for example, like, obviously, like, 2012, the culture's great, everything's awesome, and then
13, it's the one that ends in Kyle throwing the ball 70 times at the end of the season.
And so I think, like, as much as you want to say, like, it's this one thing or this one relationship or whatever, like, not winning football games is a big part of it, right? Because Ron might I've heard recently that guys are really stoked on Ron being the defensive coordinator. They just like his energy. They like the vibe that he's bringing in, and that's cool to hear. But, that's, like, not a sustainable thing necessarily if you're losing a bunch of games, because people say, well, it's not positively affecting the outcome of anything. So you get a lot of guys who don't buy in. And so so back to the main point is, like, I don't think there's an illusion of player-led teams. I think there are player-led teams. I think there are coaches that are courageous enough to let that happen, and you have to have the right team for it. Right. And I think, like, like, one thing about this team that I've said a bunch is, they don't, and this is maybe new CBA issues that you're going to have to deal with when you're constructing a roster, is there's no, like, middle class of the roster anymore. There's not that, like, 7-8 year vet that's hanging around on, like, a, $5 million for 3 year type of contract, that's been around, that knows how to be a pro, that can provide some kind of foundational support for the rest of the roster. It's like, you have old dudes, you have young dudes, and you have way more young dudes than you have old dudes. So the leadership dynamic in the locker room is drastically different, I think. And I think that's something that needs to be acknowledged. And every team's going through it in the NFL, but I look at like the Baltimore Ravens, for example, and they've done a good job of kind of saying, and I don't know how they've done this through their GM and through probably their vision, their team vision. You always talk about team vision in soccer and stuff like that, of prioritizing certain guys in leadership roles that are veterans, that are, like Picard for them. Like they could have easily let Picard walk this offseason, but they've kept him around. He's a culture piece for them. The linebackers, right? Culture pieces. And so I think that's something that those are decisions that are made, right? And so like, who are the culture pieces here? Because you can't just have two guys with captains on their chest and be like, those are our culture pieces. It's like in the example of the 2012 team, which again was one of the best team-led, player-led teams I've ever been on. Obviously, you had Fletch, who's like the guy, right? But then you had all of these kind of offensive. You had all these guys that were like in the middle, guys that were going to do the extra stuff. Like I mentioned, Zoe, Kedrick, the offensive line guys like Will Montgomery, Corey Lichtensteiger. Those guys were great because they held a standard not only in their own room, but like for the offense. You said, oh, those are the guys that are pros. And so I look at this team and I'm kind of like, do they have anybody that is not the top, not the bottom, but the middle? And so, like, again, when we're talking about, you mentioned the coaching staff, I also think in terms of roster construction, there's a little bit of an issue here in terms of kind of saying, what is our culture and who are the guys that have been around long enough to kind of embody and embrace that culture and then teach that culture to the new guys coming in. So that's why this is such a complicated thing. And I think it's even more of an issue, quite honestly, when you're not winning football games, because I've been a part of teams with bad cultures, like bad standards, but you're winning games like at some point in the year and everything's great. Everything's awesome. You're like, oh, wow, we're going to be good. It ends up being a losing culture long term, right? But it's fine while you're winning, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, totally. And there's 100% that where like if you win, it just covers up a lot of stuff. And there's been teams that I've covered where you just look around and you go, man, if this thing goes sideways, it's going to be bad. Like it's going to blow up in a bad way because they're winning for other reasons right now. But you also do occasionally have teams that really do stick together through the crap of a season, or they look at it and like, we're just not doing what we need to do, or like we've had bad injury luck, or just schedule's really hard, but like we still believe we have what we need in the locker room. And I think there was some of that to an extent for part of this season, but I think that is long gone. There's a couple things you said there that I think are interesting that also play back to Jahan's quote, and the biggest one I think is the willingness to change. And I wonder how much that is a direct callback to some of the friction with Eric earlier in the season. And,
maybe,
like the willingness to be open to doing things differently. And this is where winning also matters, because you talk about buy-in, like these things mesh, causation, correlation 100%, where if you do something new, if you ask people to do something new and it works, they'll continue to do it. And if it doesn't work, then they're going to be like, why are we changing all this stuff? Why are you upsetting the way I do things? Why are you making things harder? Why am I grinding this much more? Why am I this, that, the other thing, when there's no payoff? And in fact, this season has been worse than any of the others that they've had in the last 4 years. This is the worst season of Rivera's tenure. And so if guys had questions coming in, I think there's both on the player side, like to Jahan's point, are guys willing to do what it takes? Are they willing to learn from an Eric Bieniemy who's been there? You talk about like that middle management level, if you will, from a guy like Andrew Wiley. And I know that Wiley is the opposite of a fan favorite. He's had his struggles at times this year, but like he played on a Super Bowl winner. Right. So if he comes in and is like, hey guys, this is how we need to be doing this. We need to do these extra things or watch this extra film or whatever. Are people willing to listen to someone like an Andrew Wiley who's coming in from the outside and also does make key mistakes at big points in games? And it's like, why would I listen to you? Like, you just got Sam hit from his blind side or, hit in his face. So I think that there's that element too of the willingness from the players. But then the other side of this, if I'm going to look at it from the coaching side, is do you as a coach meet people where they are? And I don't know that Eric specifically is that kind of guy. Eric has a very set way of doing things.
We don't know. There's rumors and things, but just to be clear.
Well, I'm just saying, like, he is a guy that is like, he said this. Like, this is
Yeah,
not.
I know,
This
but I'm
is
just
not
saying.
me.
But I'm
Like,
just saying, like we're not in the meeting room, is what I'm saying.
right.
Just for people listening.
Yeah, no,
But,
we're not in the meeting room for sure. But it's like, if Eric is like my way or the highway, and this is the way we do things, this is the way that I do things, and I know it works, and you're not willing to meet guys where they are and bring them to where you want to go, that's not going to work either.
yeah.
And so it's not that Eric is wrong about the way that he wants to do things. It's just that it's getting the guys to come along with you. Did he do the things he needed to do to build those bridges, knowing that you had guys coming from a different way of doing things that might have some different thoughts, and some of whom who had been very successful in their careers, presumably. So we don't know, but those are the kind of things that I think, if you're doing the dissection, like, those are the questions you'd want to answer.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think like leadership and culture, like there's such a psychology element to it. Like,
Yeah.
I do the high school football coaching thing, and we had like a very interesting season, where it's, the head coach had to step away for a little bit. And then when he came back, like, and they're high school kids, but in some ways it like magnifies leadership. It magnifies culture in a way that think is very unique. Because in the NFL and in college not so much, but in the NFL for sure, there's like a professionalism that hides some of the cultural deficiencies, right? Because everyone is kind of like, I'm a private contractor, I have to do the best for myself, and there's this external and internal motivation. They're like these very type A people most of the time. So I think it covers up a lot of cultural deficiencies. Like when you're in the locker room, like you won't be able to tell. But in high school, I think it's more, they wear it on their sleeve a little bit more. And so what I was going to say is, like, when the coach came back, like we were running this essentially the same. Everything was the same. When he came back, there was like an uptick in players, right? Because they just believed in what this guy was doing a little bit more. And so I think like that's something else about just culture that is so ambiguous, and why there's a million books written about it, right? It's because there's no perfect formula, and there's no like, this is definitively the right way to do it. But I think it's like, to your point, like there is a way to maximize the 53 dudes on the team that is different for each team, right?
Yeah.
Like what works in New England, like if he came here like next week and said this is, and just there was no change or no like slow
Transition.
yes,
Yeah.
correct. That would be really challenging. I think you get a lot of pushback from him, in terms of what Bill Belichick and his leadership style and the culture that he is purported to have in New England. So I do think there's a lot of that about kind of finding the right mix for what your players need, for what your team needs. And it's different for everybody. Like we just talked about this team and the construction and all these different things. So I think that's one of the things that makes it really hard. And it makes it especially hard when you're not winning football games. It makes it really, really hard to kind of keep any kind of cultural identity, any type of cultural vision. And you've pointed out some of the things, like position coaches, like I think back to the Sam Mills thing, and that was obviously something where he's not coaching it the way that Jack wants it to be coached. And that, undermines that room and sets that room back for a couple of years and makes that room kind of, like you said, like you alluded to, maybe the fact that John is frustrated by Chase, and because Chase isn't doing what Sam wants or what Jack wants, and there's no accountability. And obviously, so I think there's a lot of things with this team with regards to culture, but I just wanted to point out that like there's no magic formula. Like the new guy coming in,
Right,
like is not going to be able to be like this is the road to good culture. He'll have to come in, evaluate the team, and be like, these are some things I think we could do differently from a cultural standpoint. And I think that's the thing about this that's so about Jahan's comments specifically that are so interesting, because he's not wrong to say it's a player thing, and you're not wrong to insinuate that it's a coach's thing, because every team, like I alluded to, like when I was talking about my career, is different, and the mixture of getting that done is hard. And I think having a coach and a team and leaders on the team, a leadership in the coaching room and coaches leaders on the team that understand that it's different, it is what makes a good culture. And it's really hard to find people like that.
To be clear about what I'm saying, I'm not saying it's a coach thing versus a player thing. I'm saying it's a cohesion thing.
No, yeah. I think we're saying
I know you get what I'm saying. Just to be clear for the audience, like it is a cohesion thing. It is, can you get everybody on the same page? And I think, like, for instance, to go back to the John example, like, did John all of a sudden become a bad leader? No. I think John got sick of some stuff, and he's a human being. Right. And so maybe his leadership fell off this year because he was just tired of seeing some of the other people get away with stuff that in the winning culture that he was used to at Alabama, right? That's his
Very
example.
different.
That's his version of what this winning culture looks like, which Nick Saban runs the tightest of ships, a version, by the way, that would not really work probably very well in the NFL, because all of a sudden the power structures are different from college to the pros with contracts and grown men with families versus college kids. But like the level of looseness, which Ron has had success with because he could trust guys like Luke Kuechly, et cetera, in his past. And you know, a little bit more.
And trust your coordinators too. I think that's the other thing is like, that's kind of the, you know, because I like I said, I think when Ron took over as DC, like there was a cultural shift in the defense, right? Schematic shift and a cultural shift, which again, no criticism of Jack here necessarily. It was just different, but the guys responded better to it, right? And I think like that's something that again, like you were kind of alluding to at the beginning, is like Ron is one piece, but the roots of that tree of the coaching staff are really kind of your cultural, you know, propagators here. And I think that's something else that we're those guys in the best positions all the time. I don't know. So.
Yeah, and then the front office side of it too is like, who do you bring in and empower, and like how much does that matter in your scouting? I know for a fact when the old regime was here that some of the high up personnel, maybe not a Bruce Allen, but like the Kyle Smiths of the world and some of the people on that scouting staff really prioritized certain types of guys. And that's why John Allen was targeted, by the way. Is like, we want this dude to be, as our first round pick, the captain of the football team. Like, was Jamin, like, I like Jamin's progression as a football player in a lot of ways, but like, I don't think that he was ever drafted with the idea of like, oh, that's going to be the captain leader of our team. And who you prioritize and what skill sets you prioritize from like the makeup standpoint of who your best players are matters a lot too. And I think that's something too about like that 2012 team, for instance. You have the middle management, if you will, the Lorenzo Alexanders, who's a Pro Bowler, by the way, but on special teams. But like London Fletcher, on top of being your leader, is also one of your best players. Mm-hmm. And that's really important too, is like, do you have, and that's why like I think from a Terry and John standpoint, like you're okay. But do you have other people that are willing to follow them? Do you have other people up and down that roster? Do you have that middle level of player? And, you know, are the people that you're bringing in with the hopes of being your best players the type of leadership character guys that are going to make your football team maximize?
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It is the Take Command pregame show on a burgundy and gold game day live from Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor. Craig Hoffman on hand. Logan Paulsen joining momentarily. Traffic, etc. on a Sunday, but Logan on his way. So you will get the big fella and I one more time here on the Team 980 on 106.7 The Fan and streaming live on YouTube on both stations. One more time, in many ways, the theme today. One more time at FedEx Field for the season. One more time for Ron Rivera. Reports already out, as if we really needed them, but I guess it becomes more official when someone's got sources. Ian Rappaport among those reporting that Rivera will be fired as soon as tomorrow. I think it's one of the things that we'll chop up over the next 3.5 hours. We're with you until 4:25 today on the Team 980. Of course, Caps hockey, Capitals and Kings this afternoon on 106.7 The Fan. So you got us on the Fan for about an hour and 40 minutes here. But I think what's going to be interesting for me these next couple of days is how they treat everyone else that's not Rivera. Do they wait to hire an executive vice president of football operations or whoever the top person will be and let that person make a decision on a Martin Mayhew, a Marty Herney? Do they blow out just Rivera tomorrow, or is it the entire staff? That is another key question. And I think I can make an argument both ways. I mean, someone like an Eric Bieniemy could be really valuable to a defensive-minded head coach, and considering he's under contract for another year, like, do you just say, hey, like, we'll let you make that decision, but you get to make it? And if the new defensive-minded head coach says, hey, I really like Bieniemy, I think we could work well together. Maybe they have familiarity from the past. For whatever the reason is that they gel, could EB wind up staying around as the offensive coordinator? I think that's possible. I do think Eric might get some head coach interviews somewhere else. I have obviously said many times on my show and on the Take Command podcast that I think moving on from Bieniemy is the right play, especially if you're going to have a young quarterback. I don't love the way he treated this season, and it's something we'll get into more with Logan probably in about 10 minutes from now. But that is one way to approach it, is kind of the, hey, Rivera's out. There's no circumstance where he moves to front office or becomes an assistant or any kind of anything. Like, he's done. Ron, thank you for not crashing this ship, even if you didn't particularly drive it very well. See ya. And then what do you do from there? And I think the other side of that coin of, and let's be honest on that side of the coin, right? On the let's wait and see route, you do have the reality that the new person would probably move on from all of those people. There are some folks that worked with Martin Mayhew in San Francisco that may value him not as the lead decision maker, but he brings something to the table. Marty Herney, did a good job building those teams in Carolina, where he drafted the Luke Kuechly's of the world along with Ron Rivera. And maybe if Marty is like, look, I tried to tell them do this and they did that, then there is a world where he sticks around in some capacity. But in all likelihood, there's going to be a fresh start. And then I think there is the acknowledgement of the value of a fresh start period. And I do think that there are a few maybe let's say below the coordinator level coaches and maybe even below the position level coaches, right? Your quality control type of guys that maybe keeping some of them around is worth it because they can give you, hey, this player really likes this or likes this done a certain way. I know he learns best when this, or the coach did that and that didn't go very well. That institutional knowledge, there is something to hanging on to some of that as an organization. But by and large, the people who shape the vision, GM, executive, whatever the hell Marty Herney is, his position, lead senior advisor. Obviously Rivera, Del Rio's already gone, Bieniemy. Let's just get a clean slate. Especially considering the ownership change and the idea that Josh Harris is starting something new, that Josh Harris is making it so that this is his organization with his people. There's no, we almost don't want any, we used to do it this way around. I think that there is, I realize also as I'm saying this, fans will definitely want that the most. Fans will want this is a completely clean start. We cannot possibly have anybody around, anybody that was worked on, anybody that ever collected a paycheck from Dan Snyder has to go. And that is an emotional satisfaction. I don't know that that's exactly the actual best play for the organization long term. And I think on the business side of it, we've seen some of that already where they've stepped in it in certain cases under Jason Wright's leadership. And he obviously has a big week ahead as well. But you see with some of the lack of institutional knowledge because they did so much changeover on the business side that there were mistakes made around honoring former players, or a guy like Trent Williams gets left off of the best all-time list. There's these things that happen when you lack institutional knowledge on a business side in any business, but certainly when it comes to player personnel and how all that goes down as well. So that is in many ways tomorrow. As for today, there is a game, and now there is a Logan Paulsen present here on the Take Command pregame show. And Logan is, let's see, right there.
Hello? Yeah.
There we go. There's Logan. We can get you on, if you want to slide over, we can get you on camera and everything. Come on over here, big fella.
We got a new spot today.
Yeah, no, we got which is great. We have some TVs over here. We got some TVs over there. That's kind of the nature of things here at Tap Sports Bar. Again, MGM National Harbor is where we are, and you can come join us in person all the way up until 4:25 today. Hey, look, you come and then the sun comes out.
I know.
I was kind of hiding here in the shadows. There's not a whole lot I can do about that either. But glad that you're alongside here. So I just started the show talking about kind of the choice that is ahead for Josh Harris. And you can speak to this as someone who's been in a place through coaching changes, someone who's gone to a new place right after a coaching change, someone who kind of helped implement a coaching change. Kyle brought you to San Francisco because you had that familiarity. So as you think of, what's next, obviously there's already reports, Ian Rappaport amongst others, saying, like, we know Ron's, this is going to be his last game with Washington. But then what do you do with Bieniemy, with everybody else? The kind of credence of a clean slate, and like clean slate for the sake of clean slate. Like, not even, hey, some of you guys did good jobs, but we have to start over, versus how important it is to have some level of continuity year to year, even if the biggest names are the ones that are definitely going to change out and base off the results with reason.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a part of it where it's been done kind of both ways, where like even the strength staff is gone. The strength staff, the equipment staff, the training room, it's all cleaned out and totally different. I don't know. I do think, like, if you're a new owner, like in this situation specifically with a new ownership group coming in, I think you want to kind of establish your identity a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So I think you want to kind of give that new coaching hire, the GM, the coach, the team president, an opportunity to kind of hire their staff. On the podcast on Friday or Thursday, whenever that comes out, we talked about like building culture and how challenging that is. And I think an easy way to do that is just be like, hey, here's a common thread in terms of personality and in terms of identity that we have with our coaching staff, and that goes to everything. That goes to, like, does this guy, does this coaching staff understand exactly what the head coach wants? Does the strength coach understand what the head coach wants? Does the head equipment guy understand what the new vision in terms of return to play is? All those types of things are super important. I think in this instance, because of the ownership change, it kind of makes it even more, I don't want to say important, because I think it works the other way, but if I'm the new owner, if I'm Josh Harris, I'm like, let's kind of make sure everybody's in here that we want to get in here, get this all cleaned out, and like start from square one in a very positive way.
I think the thing that's going to be interesting is, does Harris make that decision for the new people? And that's kind of what I was talking about is what I 100% feel confident in is Josh Harris is not going to dictate to the new people, you have to keep anyone.
Sure.
From Eric to Martin Mayhew to Marty Herney to whoever. If the new person comes in and is like, I don't get along with that person, or like I don't really have a place for them, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They knocked over my drink in 2012 at an NFL event. They're not going to have to keep them. But I think the question that we're going to find out tomorrow, or within the next week especially, is, does Harris make that decision for people, where it's like, none of these people are staying, we're completely wiping the slate, or does he hire people who then make decisions and you get to interview some of the people in-house? Do you wait till you have a new head coach, that coach decides on Bieniemy, that kind of question? I think that's pretty fascinating. And I don't know which way they're going to go.
I mean, I would say it's probably going to be the latter. I mean, at least that's the way I would do it. I mean, I think that's the thing about Josh Harris. He seems to be very aware of.
Yeah.
He's not like a football guy. He likes football. He's a fan of football, but he's not a football guy. And I think when you look at sports teams and good owners in the NFL, in the NBA, in the NHL, they understand like where their blind spots are, and bad owners don't understand that. And I think, like, so you're going to. That's why that first hire is so important. I think it's going to be the team president probably, or the GM, whoever it is. But let
executive vice president of football.
Yeah, let those guys kind of work through that process, make those decisions. I think that's appropriate. Obviously, he could say. I mean, I think there's value there. I think like for example, when Kyle, when Mike was fired in 2013, they were like, we want to keep Sean McVay. And I think if there's a guy on the staff that you're like, this guy's uber talented, we want to keep him around, I think that insight's important, to kind of grow and foster that young coaching environment. But I would say that he's probably going to defer to the football people. At least that's what I would do. I know a lot of football. I probably want to be involved in the process, but I want to make sure that those first couple hires are A+, and then they get the ship right, so to speak.
Yeah, I think one thing that's an important and interesting difference in that transition versus this one is Bruce Allen was still the guy in charge, and Bruce and Sean knew each other from Tampa, and the guy they wound up hiring in Jay Gruden was actually Sean's mentor. It's funny because Sean gets lumped in with the Shanahan coaching tree, and obviously Sean learned a lot from Kyle. This is not meant to take away from Kyle and Sean's relationship and that 2012 room that is now the bane of every Washington fan's existence when they show the graphic on TV. But Sean started his coaching career under the Gruden family with John in Tampa and Jay in the USFL, or whatever league it was, the Arena League. And there's a lot of continuity there. I doubt that you're going to have anything like that with what happens here.
Doesn't feel that way. Doesn't feel that way, really.
There's just from the candidates that are out there to whatever, it just doesn't feel like there's going to be a lot of carryover. So after 4-12 season, or 4-13, if it goes sideways again today, I don't think anybody will be too upset about that in the fan base. For sure. When we get back, let's talk a little about the Commanders' offense. One final day at the office for Sam Howell. He'll be the first Commanders quarterback to start all games of a season since Kirk Cousins in 2017. How do they maximize him today? Does Eric Bieniemy finally decide to do something a little bit different? And a big milestone that's on everyone's radar. That's all next. The Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Take Command pregame show on a burgundy and gold game day. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen with you from Tap Sports Bar at MGM National Harbor. Got all the games on, keep you updated. And Logan, I was just giving you some of the playoff scenarios in the break.
Very helpful.
I will absolutely make sure that we get the listeners all the playoff scenarios as well when we go around the NFL. In about an hour 15 from right now. They sent out a nice, tidy email. So I'll
did they? That's good.
Pull that up. Yeah, the NFL very good at giving us the playoff scenarios. We'll talk to Kevin Sheehan, who probably knows them off the top of his head.
Yeah.
We'll do that coming up in about 10 minutes. But real quick, let's take a look at the Commanders' offense and how it matches up today with Dallas, and really more of kind of an offensive retrospective on the year. I think today is going to be an interesting one. I mentioned before the break a big milestone that a lot of folks have their eye on today. Terry McLaurin under 60 yards needed to get to 1,000. That would give it to him all but his rookie year. So it's that 4 in a row for the fifth-year receiver out of Ohio State. So his first year, by the way, he was at 900-something when he missed the final 2 games with a concussion.
Wow.
He has been super consistent despite the fact that his quarterbacks have been anything but. Hal, his 10th quarterback that he has, or I guess Jacoby would have been his 10th quarterback that he has played with here in Washington in just that short couple of seasons. So I think when we go back to the preseason, we were obviously very excited about what we thought Eric Bieniemy could bring. And when you look at kind of have the whole season's worth of data to look at, where do you think that this offense succeeded, and where do you think this offense ultimately has fallen off in the latter half of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, obviously, and it's something we'll be talking about probably this whole offseason. But I do think that just kind of sitting here thinking back, I think he did some really cool, innovative stuff from a pass game standpoint. And I think when you look at that on the down-to-down, you're like, oh, this is pretty cool, this is nice. And I think early on in the season, I think before defenses really figured out exactly what he wanted to be from like a concept standpoint, I think it was awesome. I think you're getting open throws, getting a confident Sam Howell, all those different things. And obviously there's a little bit of a regression from Sam Howell. You're playing better defenses. And I think the thing with EB, and it's hard for me to talk about this because I know him. He recruited me to UCLA and stuff like that. But I do think there is a perspective, and a really good perspective, where it's like you probably should have run the football a little bit more. You probably should have kind of tried to play more complementary football, lean on the defense a little bit more. And obviously certain game flows early on in the season prevented that from happening. But I do think, I think when you look at, like, Brock Purdy's a great example. Look at Jalen Hurts in his first couple of years. Look at Joe Flacco. Look at Ben Roethlisberger. Look at all these guys, Russell Wilson in Seattle, kind of run first teams, and obviously with very good defenses, which this defense was not very good. But using that element of the game a little bit more reticently, I think would have been probably something that we've talked about a lot. We're going to talk about more this offseason. And using that as a way, because, you talk about, Sam, I was listening to John Kine's podcast, and they were talking a lot about how Sam was having a hard time digesting and understanding coverage structures. And I understand that. We've talked to Matt Ryan, we've talked to a bunch of different people about how challenging that is in the NFL today. But I think when you watch the San Francisco 49ers, one of the things they do a great job, when you watch the Detroit Lions, one of the things they do a great job of is they force you out of split safety coverage structures. It's like this old school, like, run to throw mentality, and that still does work. Like, stopping the run is a mathematical proposition. So if you're not going to put all these guys in the box, we're going to make you put a guy in the box. And you can't rock and roll and do all this complicated stuff. So I think that's something, again, where I feel like the offense by itself, I think you've seen how successful it's been. Andy Reid's been one of the most successful, one of the most winningest coaches in the history of the NFL. There's a reason for that the system does work.
Right.
But I think in this situation with Sam, with a young player, with a guy that needed some growth, needed some training wheels perhaps.
And an offensive line that was built more to be a run-first team than a pass-first team.
And I think, everyone wants to cook those guys all the time. I think those guys actually kind of exceeded my expectation on the course of the year. Like, I was not very high on a couple of those guys coming into the season, and I think when you look at them being ranked the 14th rated offensive line by PFF, I don't think that feels too far off when you watch some of these other groups that are really struggling, like the New York Jets, for example, just because they're on the TV right here. But still, it was a group that's not built in the same way that the offensive line was built in Kansas City, or the same way the offensive line is built in Philly, where it's definitively like just a dominant group. Like that's not this group, and that was never the plan for this group. And it kind of aligned, I'd probably say, more closely to what San Fran or what Miami does. Miami's probably a better example. It got a bunch of guys that are good football players, right, but elevated by scheme. And I think that's what we were kind of hoping for when EB came in. I think so that's the one thing I'd say is it just seemed like he brought some good offensive principles in. He brought a good standard in. He brought a good element of competitiveness. But I do feel like there was a rigidity with which he approached this that made it difficult for Sam to develop and made it difficult to get the best version of the offense on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the comments that we've gotten a lot the last couple weeks since Brissett came in and had the success that he had is, well, see, the offense works. This is all about Sam. And the response that I've kind of come up with is, you know, if your job is to build something and I give you a hammer, don't tell me what you can do with a wrench.
Right. No.
Right? And that's unfortunately what you had is like, well, if you needed to get a hammer, then you should have employed the hammer. And EB had a lot of influence. And if he had gone to Rivera at the beginning of the season and said, look, man, the only way we're going to be competitive this year is with Brissett. Sam can't do this. That would have been a conversation that they had. And Ron, you know, I don't think that conversation ever happened. The reality is during training camp, there wasn't a lot of difference between Howell and Brissett. And you thought that some of the areas where Sam struggled, he would improve and that Eric would probably give him kind of the environment to improve. I think I've been thinking a lot about this since our podcast in the middle of the week, and I want to circle back to this later, is the idea of like compromise and you know, what areas where maybe Eric needed to meet the players where they were versus players needing to meet Eric where he was. And I do wonder if we'll find out more in the kind of post-season people talking time of year.
Yeah.
Do we learn how much of that push and pull happened, right? Because like there are certain things that Eric knew when he came in he had to change because this is how you win in the league. And if you don't get up to this standard, and if I don't get people there, then we're not going to win.
Right.
And maybe he did come down and try to meet them, and the players didn't go up. And
whatever
I don't know
it
if
was,
I've given enough credence to that possibility where like we always tend to put it on the coach, right? Like how much of this is the responsibility of the players? And we don't know.
Right.
Like we just truly, honestly have no idea where that push and pull
But
went.
hopefully today, after the game, when people are willing to talk a little bit more reticently, we get a better idea.
Yeah, and I hope Eric talks. And I doubt he'll say anything on the record, but I hope we get the story because it is a season where I think in hindsight we look back at some of the talent and the fit and the roster construction, and there's certainly almost an undeniable level of blame to that. But there's also a lot more to it, and I hope that we learn more about that as the offseason goes here in the first couple weeks before we fully flip the calendar, so to speak, forward.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, it's like when you're an OC, you know, and I do the stuff at the high school, like you come in with a vision, you're like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And you start going through it, and you're like, that's not going to work. And I was talking to my buddy down in Miami. He's like, oh, yeah, man, we wanted to do all this crazy stuff. And they do a lot of crazy stuff already, but it's like we wanted to even do more. And then it's like we couldn't do it because of X, because this guy couldn't figure it out, or we couldn't get this coached. And I think there's something, too, that like understanding where that line is, where like this is my vision, and I don't want to compromise my vision, but how can maybe I adjust my vision to accommodate the player's skill set? And that's the thing that's very, very hard about coaching, because I think, you know, like for him, for EB, I would assume, you know, he comes from a winning culture. He's won a lot. You should match him because this is how we win. But I also think like Mike McDaniel's a great example, like a little bit more flexible, a little bit less rigid, but didn't have the same bias, I don't think, maybe as EB did coming in, because like your Super Bowl winning coach multiple times over. It's just interesting how the variance that could be here, I think.
Sure. And I think for me, that's the thing that I ultimately won't get over about this season is that when you're this deep into a losing streak, when you're having this little success, to not try something different. Like eventually you just go, I don't know, like I know if we do this, this, and this, but we haven't been able to do that for 5 weeks. Let's try something else. Let's try a different approach, and that never happened this season, and we'll spend some weeks dissecting it, and then eventually we'll move on and see what the next people think and how they can get this team back on a winning track as soon as next year. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. We are live at a lively Tap Sports Bar here at MGM National Harbor. Coming up next, Kevin Sheehan joins us on the Take Command pregame show. Command pregame show live on a Burgundy and Gold game day, 106.7 The Fan, the Team 980. We'll keep you updated on everything happening around the league in just a few minutes. Tell you that the Lions just scored again. They're up 14-0. In the games that matter for the Commanders the most, Atlanta is up 14-7 on New Orleans. That's a bad result in terms of draft position for the Commanders. And the most important game is the Patriots and Jets game. Of course, the Patriots just win. Then you don't got to worry about it. As long as the Commanders lose, they would have the number 2 pick. That game tied 0-0 in a blizzard between the Jets and the Patriots. Yikes, man.
Yeah, it looked pretty gross up there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that game can be played in 70 degrees in the sunshine and not be good. But you want to know who's probably watching it? Kevin Sheehan. Why? Because he watches everything. Kevin, one final time on the Take Command pregame show. Hello, how are you, sir?
What's up, gentlemen? Yep, I'm sitting here watching Red Zone and that the snow game and the Jets and the Patriots. I don't know if they can score more than 29.5. That was the total at kickoff, the lowest since 1993.
Oh.
It looks like.
Did you bet that one way or the other?
I don't have any. I don't have that. I have the terrible Panthers and the terrible Titans. I have those two sides here at 1 o'clock.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that for you. As far as keeping an eye on the actual game at FedEx Field today, what to you is is there anything that you're truly watching today? Like any football thing that you're I don't know if excited is the right word, but at least interested in seeing?
I mean, it's one more chance to see Sam Howell. I'd like to see what they did last week. I mean, they didn't have a lot of snaps in the game, overall, certainly not in the first half, but all of them were, a little bit more protective. They ran the football. Everything was quick game. Even the shot to Terry was kind of quick and in press man coverage. I'd like to see a lot of that. I'd like to see the stuff that Sam has a chance to succeed doing so he can get some confidence going into the offseason, win or lose. But I've come to the conclusion, I think a lot of people have, that quarterback in the offseason is going to be priority number 1 after the new general manager and new head coach and staff take over. But, yeah, I guess that would be the one thing. I also would find it very interesting if, for whatever reason, this game were close going into the fourth quarter. Dallas is one of those teams, they've not played well on the road, and we've seen them choke and gag things away in recent years. And I think that would be a fascinating watch if it got, if the pressure built on them in a game they are expected to win easily. And really, this is their path. 2 seed, 2 home games potentially to get to the NFC title game. They haven't won 2 playoff games since the last time they won the Super Bowl in '95. So I think that would be interesting. But from our perspective, I actually root for them to come through. So there, not much more interesting about today's game.
Yeah, not a lot of interesting stuff. I was just wanting to know if you've looked at the draftable quarterbacks, like the Williams, all these guys, Daniels. Have you looked at those guys at all? And do you have a thought on? Do you have a favorite one so far?
Yeah, I think the best player I watched all year long in college football, and I don't even think it was that close, was Jaden Daniels. And I felt like every single time LSU was on, it was must-watch TV. I think the thing that people have talked about would be the one thing that I'd be concerned with, which is he is skinny. He's 6'4", but he's 205, 210. But it's just like the combination of Lamar Jackson's speed with Michael Vick vision. Everybody's talking about Penix as a great deep ball thrower, and he is. But I think Jaden Daniels is very close as a deep ball thrower to Penix Jr. He's the one Caleb Williams is obviously incredibly special talent-wise, Logan. It's just all the stuff we don't know as fans that will become so important in this process. Everything they learn about these individuals as people, as teammates, and all of the due diligence that'll be done. We don't know anything other than what we watch. And as a huge college football fan, Jaden Daniels was my favorite player, maybe in recent years, just to watch every Saturday.
Wow. Yeah, Kevin Sheehan with us here on the Team 980 and 106.7 The Fan. Of course, catch Kevin on the Team 980, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. weekdays, also live on the free Odyssey app. Kevin, one thing that we started the show with was kind of what happens tomorrow, and we know Rivera's gone. Like, we can be adults about it. That's happening. If you're Josh Harris, though, are you completely cleaning the slate, or are you letting the next coach, the next executive vice president of football operations, do their own cleaning in terms of general manager, in terms of a guy like Bieniemy? Like, how much do you expect to happen tomorrow?
Well, I think, Craig, the way it usually works, right, is that the head coach typically and maybe one other assistant is actually under contract after the season comes to an end. A lot of the assistants are on one-year deals anyway, so it's not even like you're firing a bunch of other coaches because those contracts are just expiring. Now, Eric Bieniemy, I think, had a 2-year deal.
That is correct.
So it'll be interesting to see how that gets handled. But, yeah, no, the general manager needs to come in with a completely clean slate and be able to do what he wants, you know, with obviously the working in conjunction with ownership to find the next head coach and to have that coach be able to hire out that staff. And I do think that's the way they're going. I felt that way for a while. I don't know that anybody's reported it necessarily that that's the way they're going, but I think it'll be general manager, then, you know, working the coaching part. But we get the first domino to fall tomorrow, certainly with the firing of Ron Rivera. And I don't know, maybe front office people as well, we'll see.
Yeah, obviously there's, you know, tomorrow's kind of the day everyone's going to be watching, and this game becomes less important. I know you mentioned the development of Sam Howell. Are there any other young football players that you're like, oh, man, really got to see this guy, Forbes, Quan Martin, Henry, anybody else that comes to mind?
I mean, in a game like today, not necessarily.
Right.
I mean, it's great opportunities for them, but, you know, look at who's going to be playing. They're going to be unrecognizable names and jersey numbers out there active in this game. There have been a couple of the draft choices that, you know, people were panning the draft, and obviously Forbes has struggled. I'd like to see him get some confidence going into the offseason. I think Quan Martin's played well. I've been impressed by KJ Henry and the way he's played, and Rodriguez may have been my favorite of all of the draft choices. Obviously, he's on injured reserve at this point, but yeah, some of the key draft choices, I know that they're going to probably work to get Terry to 1,000 yards here early. I would imagine there are going to be a few quick hitches and a few quick bubbles to get Terry loose a little bit here, being, what is it, how many yards short? 54 yards short
Yep.
of 1,000 for a fourth straight season. But, yeah. You know who's played? I don't know how much you've talked about this, guys. Sam Cosmi's been great this year, especially over the last half of the season. Like, that offensive line, you know, I don't think a lot of fans understand how they've been rated by some of the advanced metrics, whether it's next-gen pass rate, pass block win rate, or PFF. But I think Cosmi's had a lot to do with that. So good for him, because he's a keeper.
No doubt about it. And if, you know, the Pro Bowl rosters obviously came out this week, and everyone's like, oh, well, Commanders got nobody. And that's exactly what it should be after this season. It's like, well, Cosmi might have had a case to he was a bit of a snub. I mean, the guys that went were awesome football players on better teams. But if there was one guy that had a claim this season for Washington, it was certainly him. Kevin, it was such a great, so great having you all season long. Appreciate your time each and every Sunday or Thursday or whenever the heck they've been playing. You've always answered the bell for us. We appreciate it, and thanks again for coming on all season.
It's been my pleasure. I love doing this with you guys. Next year, maybe a more competitive season. Let's try to have some meaningful games after Thanksgiving. That would be fun.
That would be good from your lips to whatever deity the listener believes in's ears. Kevin, thank you, sir. We will be listening tomorrow. Again, it feels weird to promo, but Black Monday coverage all day on the Team 980 and 106.7 The Fan. Make sure you tune in to Kevin, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on the Team 980 and the free Odyssey app. Thank you, sir. Enjoy the rest of the games today.
All right, Craig. Take care.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, Kevin Sheehan with us one final time this season, which means that we're done with Kevin. It's time for one final edition of Coach Speak. Ron Rivera said something that caught a lot of people's attention on Friday. We'll let you hear it if you haven't. Next, it is the Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Take Command pregame show on 106.7 The Fan, the Team 980. It's a Burgundy and Gold game day, final one of the 2023 season here at in January of 2024. Streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980 at 106.7 The Fan, where you'll see two very distracted hosts trying to power through a radio show with an immense amount of football on here at Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor. If you just saw Logan, you just heard Logan groan. If you're watching, you saw a big, oh my God, face as touchdown pass.
They call the flea flicker, and Addison for Minnesota just stopped running the route.
Yeah,
so it's a
little let me slow down and then try to get last second separation, and didn't leave himself enough time.
A little annoying.
So that winds up being a touchdown pass off the tips of his fingers. Meanwhile, Atlanta, New Orleans now with a first and goal, trailing 14-7 to Atlanta. The stakes in that game enormous. New Orleans wins the keeps their playoff hopes alive with a win. Actually, both these teams clinched the NFC South with a win and a Tampa Bay loss. New Orleans winning also is hugely beneficial for the Commanders' quest for the second overall draft pick. So a New Orleans touchdown here would help even up this game and be good for the Commanders. Meanwhile, elsewhere, I can't even find the Patriots game. Oh, it's way over there in the corner.
Oh.
Cool.
3-0.
3-0 New York?
Yes.
All right, so Jets up 3-0. That's also bad for Washington. Patriots win, and what we expect to be Bill Belichick's final game. Then the Commanders lose. Then none of the tiebreakers mattered because they won't be tied. All right, so that leads us to, Logan, back to the Commanders themselves. And Ron Rivera said something very interesting on Friday in response to a question from Nikki Javala. I think it's an undeniably true statement. I think the context of it and how you break it down is probably not as universally agreed upon. Ron was asked about his time, and he was a little more reflective than he has been. Mostly he's been saying, hey, we're just focused on Dallas. And even later in this answer, he was like, hey, people ask me how do I stay focused on this week. It's Dallas. How could you not be? It's Dallas week.
Right.
And kind of played that card. But he did say, for 3.5 years I was managing. For 5 weeks, I've been coaching since he took back over this defensive coordinator role. And he said he's had a lot of fun doing it. It's really been nice to be back in the mix. And I don't know, Logan, before I give my take on it, what do you think when you hear Ron Rivera say that at this point, this late in his tenure?
I mean, that's what head coaches do. If you're not the coordinator, which a lot of guys aren't, like when Mike was here, Mike Shanahan, he was a manager. He was a manager of Kyle. He was a manager of Jim Haslett. Same thing with Dan Quinn in Atlanta, all these guys that aren't coordinators, that's what you're doing. And you don't, and I think it's really probably very frustrating because you get very far away from football. And so, I get to see him every single day. I do that show with him, coach's show, the game plan, I think is what it's called. And, he's been pretty perky since he's been coaching again. There's a little pep in his step. There's a little life to him. So I definitely understand what he's saying because he's now talking football. He's impacting the game in a way that he hasn't done in a while. But I think the thing that I think a lot of people are probably going to be critical of, I'm just assuming, is that, I think he probably could have maybe taken a larger role in some of those situations earlier on. Because when you talk to Ron, and again, I've been very blessed to do that fairly frequently. He's a very bright dude. He's very bright when it comes to football. And so, obviously, you don't want to neuter or not empower your defensive coaches. But if you see an issue, I think those are conversations that need to be had. But again, that's why I think people don't misunderstand the structure. But that's what the coordinator's there for, and it's your job to kind of make suggestions. But ultimately, it's his decision, and I think that's something that fans maybe don't fully understand.
That's the thing that I think is an interesting question. Is is it ultimately? Oh wow, what a hit!
Yeah.
Is that ultimately his decision or the coordinator's decision, or is it? That's why you're the head coach. Ultimately, the buck stops with you as the head coach. So if there are things that are happening that you don't disagree with, again, you don't want to neuter your coordinator, but you're the guy. You're the head coach.
Right.
And when you have, especially when things are not working well and you have ideas that are different, I would say it is up to you as the guy in charge to say, no. I've given you leeway. We tried it your way. It's not working. We need to try this.
I think ultimately, though, that's something, again, that, common sense would say that that's the right thing. I think it's your idea to, what was I going to say? I kind of lost my train of thought because there was a big play that just happened. But it's
coordinators having final say.
Yeah. So it's basically you say this. If I'm the coach and you're the coordinator, I say this is a problem we're having. I need you to fix it. and I'm saying this needs to happen. I don't then say, I think this person should start. I think this person should start. I don't do that, right? Because that's your job. And so I think that's like where that line gets a little bit fuzzy. Like when Mike and Kyle were here, he let Kyle kind of run, but he would give suggestions. You know, he'd be like, what are we doing? Because, again, he was kind of mentoring the coordinator, right? Jack and Ron, like, that's not happening. There's no mentorship happening there. So that line of communication, and I think, like, when you have conversations with Ron, it becomes very clear that he had made suggestions. Jack had chose to handle it a different way. But, again, that's Jack's prerogative. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I think that's where it gets a little bit weird. It's like that coordinator position, they do the most football-y stuff.
Right.
On the staff. And so you as a coach are like, hey, man, you need to get this fixed.
Right.
And then ultimately that's why he gets fired, because he's not able to get it fixed.
Right. And then I think the other part of that is like, okay, well then how did you do as a manager, right?
Yeah.
And if ultimately your job as a manager is to most successfully deploy resources, and if you as a coach could give more as like a coach and a manager, you got to find a way to set it up so that you can give that. And by the way, if these problems are not getting solved, you need to find someone else to solve them.
Right.
And that is something that I think the criticism with him holding on to Scott Turner at least a year too long.
Right.
If not, there's criticism that hire in the first place.
And like Sam Mills, I think is another example.
Sam Mills, and the timing of that was super bizarre. And then Jack, Jack's the one that I find in some ways defensible from like a timeline standpoint,
right?
Because they kept starting badly and then finishing really well, and like you can at least rationally
and you're
defend
kind of
that.
Waiting for it to turn the corner,
right? It's like, hey, when can we skip the bad start this year? Thanks, buddy. And it never happens. I do think though that I probably would have moved on from Jack last offseason, and he didn't. And part of that might have also been circumstantial, in fairness, because of what was going on with ownership and budgets and all these kinds of things. So we just don't know, and I think that's something that we'll learn a lot more of over the next couple of weeks as people talk, and when they're no longer tied to an employer or they're scared that they're not, they're going to impact the season negatively because it will be over. But it is the kind of thing that I think what Ron said was correct. I don't know that it's a great defense for the record, because obviously there is no defense for a record that's this bad. But I do wonder, what would it look like?
What was Nicky's question? Was it just like?
I think it was just asking to reflect on his time here and things that he's done and decisions and whatever. And then the other part that people do like to bring up, which I think is actually a little bit unfair, is he's been coaching for 5 games and they're 0-5 in those 5 games.
Right.
However, it's almost impossible to flip a defensive unit or an offensive unit in the middle of a season. You're still dealing with the same personnel. And you're not. Ron didn't really install a new system. He made tweaks within the current one and called it a different way. And they've been better.
They've been better, yeah.
But better is relative term when you're you're the worst defense in the NFL. So yes, they're 0-5. But like I think actually what he's done as a coach in the last 5 weeks is somewhat impressive.
Yeah.
Even if it's not like, oh yeah, I would want that guy. My number 1 pick is defensive coordinator. Moving forward, if I'm a young offensive coach somewhere else. So there are levels to this, as the kids say.
Yeah.
All right, that's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman here on the Take Command pregame show. When we get back, you'll hear from the Sports Junkies, their thoughts one more time on this 2023 season, and then we'll get into what's going on around the rest of the NFL in the next hour as well. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen with you on the Take Command pregame show. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here on the Take Command pregame show on a burgundy and gold game day. The final one of the 2023-24 season. Happy New Year, I guess we should say.
Yep.
For that, are you how late in the year are you a Happy New Year guy?
I mean, what is this? This is 7th?
Yeah, it's the 7th.
I'll probably say it next week too.
I'd say like today's kind of the last day.
If I haven't seen you in a while, I'll be like, hey, Happy New Year. But I'm not a big Happy New Year guy anyway. I just kind of.
Not your deal.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just like, Happy New Year, whatever.
Yeah, it's like, okay, the calendar turned.
Yeah.
Okay. Logan hates trips around the sun. All right, here's what we got for you coming up this hour. 2:30, we will take a look around the NFL, get you updated on all the games and all the implications. By the way, if you're listening on 106.7 The Fan, we're with you until about 2:40 today. Then you'll get pregame of Caps and Kings, and then obviously the game itself on the Team 980. We're with you all the way until kickoff at 4:25. With you on YouTube at 106.7 The Fan, at the Team 980. The entire show as well, and of course everything always live on the free Odyssey app. The great head coach debate, offensive or defensive head coach, in about 10 minutes. But right now, thoughts from the Sports Junkies on this Week 18 matchup between the Commanders and Cowboys.
Thanks, Craig. So here we are at the end of another poor, miserable Commanders season that is finishing with a whimper. The Commanders
got 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
All signs are pointing to Ron Rivera's swan song, his final act as Commanders head coach. Can the Commanders pull the upset against the playoff-bound and division-hated rival Dallas Cowboys?
It's funny that, we took calls during the week on our show. How many Commanders fans don't care about having the higher draft pick? They would rather beat Dallas, who they hate, and they would rather see Philadelphia win the division. Because they hate Philly too, but they'd rather Philly win the division and not Dallas, making it tougher for Dallas to go on the road in the playoffs, because they have not been good on the road in the playoffs the last few years, and not even in the regular season. So those Commander fans, they don't care about the number 2 pick. As a neutral football fan, I say, yes, you would want to lose this game.
Absolutely.
And have the higher draft pick. Who knows if the quarterback if they take a quarterback, is going to pan out, but you have to take that swing because you need to upgrade the position. I would be borderline shocked if Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott lost this game for the Dallas Cowboys, because it means so much for them.
It would be a stunner. And I just look and see with this Dallas offense, especially the passing offense, which averages right around 255 passing yards per game. How is this beleaguered Commanders secondary going to slow down Dak Prescott and super alpha wideout CeeDee Lamb, who's just had a season for the ages for the Cowboys? Remember when Mike McCarthy took over the play calling, Kellen Moore departs and goes to the Chargers, a lot of people were like, all right, McCarthy's just going to pound the ball, try to, put it in Tony Pollard's hands, let his defense win the games.
No.
That hasn't been the case. They don't throw it as much as the Commanders, but they'll throw it all over the yard. And, I wouldn't be shocked to see CeeDee Lamb targeted 15 to 18 times and have 10 or 11 grabs and at least one end zone trip in a game that matters everything for the Cowboys. There's everything on the line, home field advantage, and the Commanders are just kind of limping out, trying to have a decent showing. And look, Ron definitely wants to win his last game here as a coach. I just think it's an uphill battle against a playoff-bound Cowboys team.
Yeah, CeeDee Lamb's got 122 catches. He had a bomb game against Detroit. 12 catches or something, over 200 yards.
Yeah.
He's look, if the weather sucked like it is going to suck or did suck on Saturday, I would say, all right, it's more of a crapshoot. But the weather's going to be fine. It's just going to be cold. This game is a playoff game from the Dallas Cowboys perspective, because they need to win to stay at home and play games in the playoffs at home in the Jerry Dome. I just would be completely shocked if Washington pulled this upset. They are a 13.5-point dog, almost plus 700 on the money line. Dallas is undefeated in the playoffs, or undefeated at home this year. They were 8-1 last year at home. They know how important this game is. This is basically a playoff game for Dallas, so Dallas will win.
And how is the offensive line, the subpar line for the Commanders, going to keep Sam Howell upright with Micah Parsons prowling all over the field? I mean, that's going to be a problem from the opening kick. I just don't know how they're going to be able to keep that Dallas defense, that swarming defense, aggressive defense from making life living hell basically for Sam Howell for 3.5 hours on Sunday.
I think CeeDee Lamb goes nuts, and I think Jake Ferguson, the tight end, gets a score. I'm taking the Cowboys 29-14.
Oh, I think the Cowboys get well into the 30s in scoring here. I think I think it's just another
30 seconds
for Sam Howell. I think the Cowboys get close to 40, not quite there. I have the Cowboys winning big, 38-20, and that would send Ron out on another losing note as the Commanders' head coach. I would expect
10 seconds
to be fired at some point Sunday, if not early Monday. Fingers crossed it happens at about 5:59 a.m. Monday, leading into the junk show. Back to you boys, Craig.
All right, thanks, guys. Funny story, Logan. The last time that a Commanders coach got fired, it did happen about that time.
Really?
Because after the New England game in 2019, I went to bed knowing there was a good chance that Jay was getting fired the next morning, middle of the season. And we're all like, okay. Doesn't happen late at night. Doesn't happen like right after the game, whatever. And I wake up at about 5:30 a.m. to a phone call. And, like, I am someone who puts Do Not Disturb on my phone, so you have to call me twice. And Drab, the producer of the Junkies, did indeed call me twice. And I saw the number, and I was like, I know what happened here. And it's like, hey, man, they fired Jay. I was like, all right, let me go to work.
Right.
And, you start texting people and, get ready to join the show and all that. And sure enough, that's what happened. So I would imagine, there's a team meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's a kind of regularly scheduled thing. By the way, is that, how does that work, the end of season schedule? What do they tell you players? And, does it change if the coach gets whacked?
No, so yeah, usually you have that meeting kind of no matter what, that 9 o'clock meeting. And it's just kind of like to talk about, hey, this is your point of contact. If there's an issue, call this person. Nothing crazy, and it's just like everyone hates the meeting because, you got your flight booked and you're trying to get out of there. But, it's very common. Even when guys are getting fired, it's like, that's the meeting. What's up? Here we go. Check in. Everything's good. Go clean out your lockers. Go check out with the medical staff. Then have fun. Stay out of trouble.
Yeah. So we'll see. I do wonder if, that meeting – if it's been done by then, if Ron leads that meeting, if someone else leads that meeting, locker clean out will be right after, like you said. I kind of hope for the, selfishly for the media, for us, and kind of in a weird way not even a weird way. I would say for the players too. Like I kind of hope that if it's going to happen, it's happened by then. So they call Ron in at 8 o'clock in the morning and like, hey, thanks for everything. He and Josh have a nice little chat, and maybe even Ron gets to say goodbye. I think that Ron's like a professional that they can trust, whatever. Yeah. But that way, you don't. When we go talk to the players in the locker room, it's not still hanging out over there.
No, I think, it'll be done. From what I understand, I think it'll be done by then.
Yeah, so we'll see. Could happen tonight after the game as well, but more than likely tomorrow morning. And we'll have, obviously, coverage of everything all day, what everyone's saying, because it's far beyond. Like, that's actually, even though that's the biggest headline, that's actually the least interesting thing about tomorrow. It's what else happened. It's what people say. It's all that. So we'll have coverage all day long.
I was going to say, that's a big deal probably, yeah. Because, that's when you're, especially if the coach is fired, if that's happened, people are very forthcoming, let's say.
Yeah. Did your answers change? Were you one of those guys that was willing to be forthcoming in the locker room?
I always try to be very forthcoming about football stuff, just be very honest about it. About coaching and about other guys on the team, I usually played it pretty close to the vest, kind of like I do now,
Yeah.
Keep that to myself. But I know a lot of guys felt very comfortable being like, yeah, this guy's terrible and blah, blah, blah. That wasn't my bag necessarily, but,
There was in the team. Do you just know who's going to let it rip?
Oh yeah, you can this used to make me crack up. Is like they'd be going to like the normal guys talking to them, but little did they know it's like the second string linebacker that they really need to talk to for all the tea because that guy is just a boiling pot. Like I think I'm better than the starter and blah blah blah. And I'm just a big malcontent, and he's just ready to dump it all out there, but no one asked him.
But not the backup tight end. That guy was going to be.
That guy's locked. That guy's a true pro, that guy.
So we'll, of course, have coverage of all of that tomorrow. 106.7 The Fan, the Team 980 all day long, starting with the Junks at 6 a.m. On the Team 980 side, all the way through my show. Of course, we start at 4. I'm actually going to go out to Ashburn for locker clean out, and who knows, maybe we get a press conference from Josh Harris tomorrow as well. That's not off the table, unlike years past where you pretty much knew Dan Snyder was never going to do that.
Right.
Neither was anybody that he really employed on the management side. So could be a very interesting day tomorrow. We got coverage for you all day long on all of our platforms. When we get back, let us dive into what is next for the Commanders. The biggest question, of course, who the general manager and head coach are going to be. But on the head coach side of it, there's this kind of philosophical battle between offensive-minded, defensive-minded head coach. Is there a preference one way or the other, or should there be a preference one way or the other? What are the positives and negatives? We'll dive into that next with Logan Paulsen. I'm Craig Hoffman on the Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. Also streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 and at 106.7 The Fan. Of course, live as well on the free Odyssey app. All right, Logan, after the Texans' big win last night, a lot of folks, because there's obviously been an ongoing debate, offensive head coach, defensive head coach. And
Right.
I think the strongest feelings are on the offensive side, where there's people saying like, hey, got it. Grant Paulson said this on our show a couple of weeks ago. I'm certainly, I would consider myself in this boat.
Yeah.
I think you got to go with an offensive head coach. I think the history tells you that there's better outcomes. It doesn't mean there aren't good defensive head coaches. D'Amico Ryan's certainly one of them, a fantastic hire by the Houston Texans. But there's other people like Chris Russell, who's been big on the hire Dan Quinn bandwagon. You played for Dan down in Atlanta. What are the upsides, downsides of an offensive versus a defensive head coach, and what challenges does each path present?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen recently, like with the offensive head coach, is that you're securing your offensive coordinator and your offensive identity for a long time. And when you are in a league that's an offensive-driven league and you need to develop quarterbacks, you need to develop offensive players, that becomes critical. It becomes absolutely critical you get that done. And we just talked about how Ron is more of a manager. When you hire a defensive head coach, that's usually what's happening. Obviously, they can call defenses, but I think you open yourself up to a lot of turnover at the offensive coordinator spot. So I think that's kind of one of the issues. And I've talked to Dan Quinn a couple times about this, and one of the things about his tenure in Atlanta, he always says, it's like, I wish I would have been more serious and more deliberate about that hire and about that funnel offensively for me. And so I think if you have a coach like Dan who's gone through this process.
Yeah, and just to remind folks who may not be as aware, Dan had Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator. They go to the Super Bowl. Obviously, the Super Bowl itself doesn't go well, but it's enough to get Kyle the head coaching job in San Francisco. And then Dan loses Kyle, ultimately decides to hire Steve Sarkisian.
Right.
And that's actually the year that you were there. Was that next year?
And I think Steve's a bright dude, obviously, but it's not Kyle, right? And I think like one of the things that Kyle's done a good job of, and I think this is a testament to Kyle and not necessarily something that's coordinated with offensive coaches, is that he understands that as you win, your coaches are going to leave, right? So who's the next person coming up? Have I developed this person enough? Have I gotten this guy ready? And I think that's one of the things, after talking with Dan, this was a couple years ago now, basically him saying, like, I understand how important that is now. I understand how important it is to have a developmental philosophy in terms of offensive coaching staff, so I'm never in a position where I don't have that guy there. Because, like, I will say Dan was one of the best dudes that I ever played for. Like, it was awesome going to work every day. We talked about culture on the podcast on Thursday. Like, he did such an excellent job of that, but at some point he got his focus, his expertise got diverted. He had to kind of go back to the defensive side of the ball. That kind of managerial role over the offense wasn't there anymore. And so I think that's one of the issues in terms of defensive hiring head coach, because I think you look at D'Amico, he's having an excellent year, but who's going to get hired from that staff?
Right. Bobby Slowick is one of the top names all of a sudden in hot young offensive coordinator, head coach candidate circles. And so for everyone that says, oh, well, like, look at D'Amico, success story. What happens when Bobby Slowick gets hired? Do they have that next guy? It's going to be hard. Our old friend Brendan Darr, used to be the producer for Grant and Danny, had a great analogy on Twitter yesterday. He's like, you can hit a parlay, but when would you rather hit one bet or a parlay, right? So you hit one bet on the offensive coordinator, you win your bet, you get your money, and you cash it out, right? You hit the two-legger, you get D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick, sweet.
Right.
Well, now all of a sudden, year over year, you're just adding legs to that parlay. Right. And you'd rather just be able to win the single bet in the first year and not have to worry about it moving forward.
Right.
I think here's my I don't know if it's a hot take. You're gonna tell me here, but I think that there is also something to the way that offensive coaches think about football that I'd rather have that person shaping my organization. And this is going to sound offensively elitist. I don't know how this would go if I was sitting next to like Kedrick Golston versus sitting next to you. I might be a little scared to say it. But like defense is so much about assignment alignment. It's about simplifying. It's about just narrowing things down. And offensively, the detail that coaches get into, I think, is elevated. The way you have to think about structures and personnel and all these types of things. Like defense is a lot about making it work and just kind of finding a way and being very flexible and adaptable. Offense is about identity and that super nuanced detail.
Sure.
And I think that translates well to that managerial role because you will always think about the game that way versus a less detailed approach on defense. And that's not to say that that doesn't work and that defensive coaches aren't smart. It's just the demands are different. And I think the demands of being a good offensive coordinator translate better to head coach. And by the way, a guy like D'Amico Ryans, because he coached under Kyle Shanahan as a defensive coordinator, was forced to think that way. And so I need someone with that kind of offensive level of detail and mentality, even if they're like to break the mold if I'm going to hire a defensive guy.
Yeah, and so I'd say, like, obviously I do think you are probably, in the traits you're describing a larger bucket of offensive coaches. But I also think you are describing a section of defensive coaches. And what I mean by that is I think you're describing like guys that are thinking about the game not in 2024 or 2025, but where's it going to be in 3 years, and how do I head that off? You know, guys like Vic Fangio, guys like Dan Quinn, I think is a great example. Look what he's done with Dallas in terms of how he's totally changed that defensive philosophy. He understands what offenses are trying to do, and he understands how important it is to leverage those guys. D'Amico Ryans is another great example. I think the defensive coordinator down in Atlanta does a great job. The defensive coordinator in Minnesota are all guys that I think are forward-thinking with regards to that stuff. They change a little bit every single year in terms of keeping up with the offenses and what they're trying to do. So I think if you can find a defensive guy like that, I don't think there's a lot of them. I think you're talking about the top defensive guys, much like you're talking about the top offensive guys in the NFL. I think you could make that work. And I think that's one of the reasons why D'Amico Ryans works in Houston, because he's seen how Kyle fastidiously tries to dissect offenses. He can mold his defense to say, oh, this is what they're trying to do in this bunch. These are the problems that Kyle was going to present to us. And I do think there's a strong correlation there. It's just it teaches you a problem-solving ability that is very advantageous for coaching football. And I think when you look at Dan, problem solver, right? When you look at Brian Flores, problem solver. When you look at D'Amico Ryans, problem solver. Offensive coordinators have to do that more, and it's a more cultivated skill set. But you can find defensive guys that I think have that kind of have cultivated that as well.
Yeah, you can find it, and that's the thing. It's like there's no hard and fast one way or the other. The only hard and fast rule is that if you're a defensive coach and you're very good offensively, your offensive coordinator is probably going to get poached. In the same way, by the way, your defensive coordinator might get poached if you are a good offensive coach. Obviously, Kyle's dealt with this. Yeah. Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryans, et cetera, on down the list. Steve Wilkes is probably going to get some interviews, who's coordinating right now in San Francisco. But I do feel like defensive coach, like, are DCs easier to replace than OCs?
That's a great question. One of the things that I think, after talking with a bunch of my friends a couple weeks ago, a bunch of coaches in the NFL, is I think it's more having built a network of coaching relationships and being able to fill those roles with good coaches.
Yeah.
Like, I think that is the thing that really sticks out to me. Like, if you've got a small network, small tree, Brandon Staley, I think, is a good example of this. He kind of jumped at his first head coaching opportunity, while, guys like Kyle, guys like Mike McDaniels, they kind of pushed it off for a little bit until they kind of broadened their exposure in the NFL, and that's positive because it says, these are the things that make good coaches. This is how I develop good coaches. This is how I have built a relationship with Coach X. When I am now the head coach and I need a new offensive coordinator, I trust his perspective that he can come in and get this done for me, right? And I think that is something that's so, so important, is having a coach with a little bit of experience and understanding, like, hey, like, I know a lot of really good coaches. My networks are full of good coaches. How do I maximize those guys, and how do I develop coaching? I think, we always forget, like, we're talking about the draft coming up here soon. I was talking with my buddies last night, and he was like, oh, we should just draft 5 offensive linemen. It's like, no, I want to get a good offensive line coach that's going to develop the 2 guys we do pick and make those guys starters.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing with coaching. It's not about getting good coaches. It's about ensuring you have a pipeline of development with the players and with the coaches. And I think having a head coach or a GM or a president of football operations that understands those things is imperative in this process. And that's why I don't think offense, defense is as important. Obviously, I have a little offensive bias, so it would probably go that way. But I think that if I'm doing the interview, I want to hear stuff about that. How do we develop coaches? How do we develop players? How do we stay innovative? All those things are things that I think are paramount in this situation.
No, I totally agree. And again, it's not exclusive one way or the other.
Right.
But the bucket is bigger on the offensive side, which is certainly something to keep in mind. I also think it's going to be interesting. Washington is in great position. I think they're one of the best openings, period, but there's some rumors heating up of Jim Harbaugh potentially to L.A.
Yeah.
Matt Eberflus could keep his job in Chicago. I think that would make Washington the most attractive job on the market, and they could have their pick, which is going to be interesting to see who they interview. Virtual interviews can actually start fairly quickly, or at least requests can get in quickly. The real in-person interview process doesn't start until later in January for guys currently employed by NFL clubs. So your Ben Johnsons, your Frank Smiths, your Bobby Slowicks, etc., even if those guys are out of the playoffs as of next week. So keep your eye on that. Your favorite local beat reporter will have you covered, and of course, as will we, on the radio. When we get back, we'll go around the league. Also, a reminder, this will be our final segment on 106.7 The Fan before we lead you off into Capitals hockey. So if you want to stick with us, make sure you flip on over to the Team 980. We'll be right back on the Take Command pregame show. Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen with you at Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor. Nice and full, but a few spots available if you want to come by, grab a drink, watch some football, which is exactly what we're doing. We'll get you caught up on some of that now. Logan, let's start with the Browns and Bengals. Bengals up 24-0 at the half. 24-0.
Well, I mean, they're not playing anybody.
Yeah, Browns not really playing anybody. Bengals don't really have anything to play for. This is just a meaningless football game, which stinks for the Bengals, who could wind up with a 9-8 season despite the injury to Joe Burrow. Like, it's actually kind of an impressive year if they win this game. I mean, it's an impressive year in general.
Well, and also, like, that's the best division in football this year. Like, who would have thought that? I mean, like, just a murderer's row of teams, like Pittsburgh, obviously Cleveland, and then Baltimore. Like that. Like, they're all really tough teams to play. So.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, in a game that unfortunately just became possibly meaningful for the Lions, they are up 13-6, but they're all everything. Rookie tight end Sam Laporta went down, looked like a knee injury. His ankle
carted off.
Yeah, it could wind up just being like a high ankle sprain situation. Right. The way his leg kind of twisted, got caught in the turf a little bit. It obviously could be worse than that. Yeah. But he, in a game where he sets the rookie receiving record for tight ends in terms of receptions, Laporta down, and that would really, really stink for Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, he's just been so fantastic this year, and it's just so funny, the draft, like thinking back to his draft evaluation. And
you love that kid.
I loved him, but there were guys you talked about, like, oh, I don't know if he can run, I don't know if he's fast enough. It's like the draft is such a crapshoot in that way, and it just obviously a bummer for him here, but great job by Detroit, drafted a good player, trusting their evaluation, and hopefully it's something long-term for them.
I think that's something Detroit's done really well is they just identify good football players, and
absolutely.
They're like, let's not overthink it.
Right.
Laporta's awesome. Let's take him.
He's like
Jahmyr
tough,
Gibbs,
he's physical.
Jack Campbell.
Yes.
Like, they've gotten a ton out of their draft class.
Penei Sewell even, too. Like, go back that far. It's like everyone was worried about his athletic profile. It's like, no, he's like a tough son of a gun that fits our cultural identity, and here we go.
And is really good.
Yeah.
Detroit.
Most importantly, right?
Yeah, right. Like good. The draft evaluation. If I get away from this at all this offseason, I just want you to bop me upside the head.
Yeah.
The number one thing on a draft profile should be, is this guy good at football?
Yeah.
And that's always funny when you see how draft evaluations change after all the games have got done getting played.
Well, I think it's so funny. The thing that I always like, I start off my process is like binary. It's like, are you good enough? Yes or no. And like that's and then how it falls after that, I think it kind of opens up.
Not that nothing else matters,
but
if the
answer
is no,
right?
That definitely matters. Jags and Titans. Jaguars need a win to get in the playoffs and win the AFC South. Trevor Lawrence is playing, and they're down 21-13 at the half.
Is there like a box score? Let's click on that box score real quick there, Craig. I mean, because I think Trevor Lawrence looked like he was playing well early. Obviously, 2 interceptions since we saw that.
That will hurt.
That's not a great deal. And the Titans, man, I like the Titans. I like their philosophy. And it's always cool when Derrick Henry has 70 yards on 9 carries, I think. So.
And as long as only 18, he's just consistently crushing it.
Murdering
Lawrence,
people. 14
of 19. So he's only got 5 incompletions, except for 2 of them aren't incompletions.
Right,
they're interceptions. He does have a 59-yard bomb to Calvin Ridley. And this game could be big for Mike Vrabel, too. Rumors that he could be on the hot seat, which would seem crazy to me.
That would seem crazy.
Also seems like New England could be poking around there trying to potentially trade for Vrabel as Belichick is likely out. All right, Jets and Patriots. This game hugely important for Washington.
For nobody else, though, right?
It's important for New England. If the Patriots can come back and win in this game and Washington loses, the Commanders will automatically lock up the number 2 overall pick. Other than that, we got a tiebreaker scenario, and we can get into that as we go. But not shockingly, this game is ugly. It is hideous. It is offensively offensive.
It's snowing. It's gross.
Yeah, it's snowing. Both quarterbacks right around 50 yards at halftime. Trevor Siemian, 5 of 13 for 51 yards. Bailey Zappi is 6 of 15 for 48 yards.
Tough stat.
That's a yikes, bro. Breece Hall, by the way, 17 for 76.
Yep. I mean, Is there any more you want to say about that? I don't really.
No, honestly, I probably said too much. Let's just keep that moving.
This is actually low-key good game, the Falcons-Saints.
Falcons-Saints has been great. Bijan Robinson, a big explosive 71-yard catch on a swing pass. Desmond Ridder is actually playing
well.
The game of his life, to be honest. Ridder starting today after Taylor Heineke is inactive. He's the emergency third quarterback with an ankle injury. Ridder, 14 of 16 for 231. And they have put the game in his hands. I mean, they're only run the ball 8 times.
Which is crazy. Like, when you see a Atlanta stat line, it never looks like this.
No. But they've also thrown the ball to Bijan 6 times. He's caught it all 6 times for 96 yards and that touchdown. Jonnu Smith, the other touchdown. Meanwhile, unfortunately for New Orleans, they're playing without Alvin Kamara. Kamara out, and they've been able to score in the first half anyway. They just need their defense, which has really carried them all season to the extent that 8-8 is being carried.
Right.
They've scored 17 in this one. They just got to figure out how to get some stops in the second half.
Yeah, if I'm an Atlanta fan here, I'm a little worried about Desmond Ridder getting a little cool coming out of halftime, maybe throwing a pick, because he seems to do that with some significant regularity.
Yes, and by the way, playoff scenario-wise, if whichever team wins this game is in position to win the NFC South if Tampa loses to Carolina. This game should be 7-6 Carolina right now as it nears starting the second half. But Tampa is up 6-0 because I can't remember who the receiver was. It might have been DJ Chark. Yeah, it was Chark. Caught a ball from Bryce Young.
Really nice play by Bryce Young, actually.
Yeah, he's actually had a decent little he's shown some flashes here at the end of the season that he might wind up being all right. But Chark has a 42-yard catch that he needed to be 44. At about the 2-yard line, he gets hit, is extending the ball for the end zone. Ball comes out, fumble through the end zone. Tampa recovers, touchback, and thus it is 6-0 at halftime, Tampa over Carolina.
Yeah, it's crazy also that, like, your guy Bryce Young's stat line is almost entirely composed of that one explosive play.
Yeah, 6 of 11, 67 yards. Not exactly a standout performance, but as I said, has been better the last couple of weeks.
I agree.
And Elijah Evero, I think is the name of their defensive coordinator, has got that defense playing really well. By the way, congrats to Derek Brown of the Panthers.
That's right.
100 tackles as a defensive lineman. That is an NFL record, I believe.
Most since 2000.
Or most since 2000. There you go. Look at Logan prepared with the stats.
Yes.
Logan prepared with the stats.
It was on the TV a second ago.
Oh, or he's paying closer attention while I'm operating the radio show.
Seconds.
All right, coming up on 106.7 The Fan, Capitals and Kings pregame with John Walton. In about 7 seconds, we continue with you the rest of the afternoon slate on the Team 980. Closing out hour number 2, now exclusively on the radio on the Team 980, live on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980's YouTube pages, though. So, Logan, there's lots of people or places people can find us.
Yeah.
I think that's the short version of the story.
Yeah.
If you want to find us on a Sunday and you don't know by now, well, you wouldn't be listening anyway, so I don't know why I'm wasting any more time on this. And we have no more shows after, so you can't really tell a friend. All right. Desmond Ridder did just Desmond Ridder, which is nice for Washington, through a pick. So
bad pick, too. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, that's the full Desmond Ridder for you.
Yeah.
So New Orleans takes over inside the 30-yard line. So see if they can get out ahead. Of course, Washington, if the Patriots win today, the Patriots lose today, Washington loses. They need a tiebreaker, and they, I believe, with the New Orleans win, would actually lock up the number 2 pick. They might need one more game as well. We'll go through all the scenarios a little bit later on in the show. However, Logan, we continue previewing the rest of the games on the slate, getting into the 4:25 window. Bears and Packers. Packers, in terms of the playoffs, they are win and in. They can also tie and get some help. If Minnesota loses and they get some help. And obviously Minnesota losing right now 13-6 to Detroit. But Green Bay win and in. And Jordan Love has really just had just kind of steadily grown and had a great year. He's going to hit probably 4,000 yards in this game. He's over 30 touchdowns. He's 11 picks right now. Big day for Green Bay, and kind of a big day for Chicago as well.
Yeah.
They can finish on a high note, especially if Justin Fields has a big day, trying to stake his claim to that job moving forward.
Yeah, kind of two interesting teams. Everyone talks about Jordan Love and how young he is, but their receiving core is incredibly young. Their tight end core is incredibly young, and so they've got this kind of really interesting, young, talented nucleus of players that could kind of parlay you or kind of develop into something pretty exciting next year in a division that's going to be up in the air, quite frankly, with Kirk Cousins getting hurt and all that kind of stuff, and obviously Detroit kind of being the class now. And then the Bears, the more I've seen Fields play recently, the more I'm like, well, maybe they can stay with him. I don't know. And again, I
think it's such a tough call.
I know,
because you're do you go get him a stud left tackle, or do you go get a Marvin Harrison Jr.,
right. Or do you trade the first round? Do you trade the first pick overall?
And trade down to 6, and you can still get Neighbors from LSU, and if you can't get Harrison.
Yeah.
I think they can wind up I think New England is the team to watch this offseason in terms
they make
of
a push.
Does Kraft try to get a little bit desperate and say, hey, we're going up to number 1 and we're taking Caleb Williams, and Chicago go, okay, no, we really want him.
Right.
Give us, and eventually they wind up trading 3-4 first rounders for that number 1 pick.
And then think about how
I think they would only fall to 3.
And how reticent that team could be to turn it around. They'd have all this. They have a ton of draft capital already. They have more draft capital, and then you're talking about a team that's going to look like the Philadelphia Eagles here in a couple of years. If they just keep stockpiling draft picks. But yeah.
And the thing is, if you have that many picks, you can afford to pay Fields more.
Yes, absolutely. And again, two really interesting teams, two really interesting storylines. Either one of these teams, Packers and the Players,
win and they're in.
The Bears, I think, they really they are the off-season team right now. I think in terms of things to talk about.
Well, with the number 1 pick for the second straight year, they control the offseason. They also have nearly $100 million in cap space. And again, I've said this a couple times, but I think it's worth reiterating. Matt Eberflus keeping his job is a great thing for Washington because if you're a head coach candidate and you want a blank slate and resources to do stuff, the only place that was better than Washington, if that's the profile of job you want, is Chicago. And it doesn't look like Chicago is going to have an opening. Broncos and Raiders. This game, there's no real playoff implications.
It's kind of gross.
They play in Las Vegas, so the game starts at 4:25.
Kind of a weird. The storyline there is the Russell Wilson thing, kind of a wacky bit.
Yeah.
O'Connell for the Raiders, I think potentially, if he continues to play well, maybe he's the guy, the bridge guy for them next year because they're going to be out of spot to pick a quarterback. But not ton of exciting information.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch how Vegas comes out. A couple of players have said hey, we want Antonio Pierce to be the coach. So if I'm Pierce, I'm hey, you guys want me here? Go play like it today.
Yeah.
I don't know if you say that directly in front of the team, but I would certainly make sure that message got across to someone.
Yeah.
And then obviously the Broncos, if they win this game, they would actually finish over 500, which is nuts considering how bad they were earlier in the season.
Yeah, kudos to Sean Payton, quite frankly, because he's done a lot for them. I mean, obviously, this thing with Russell Wilson is wacky.
There's some wacky bits with Sean Payton, but obviously, dude is a good football coach.
Excellent football coach. Obviously, as a human being, we can talk about that later. But if you would have said how many games are the Broncos going to win, I would say they'd be well under 500. So for them to be right in that ballpark is pretty impressive.
No doubt about it. New Orleans just scored. So good for the Commanders there. Chris Olave, a touchdown from Derek Carr.
So did Tennessee, man. So 28-13, Jacksonville's down. So kind of just a crazy couple of games going on this morning.
For sure. All right, NFC East, Eagles and Giants. Eagles win and the Commanders win. Eagles back on top. They would get the NFC East crown, but alas, they gave up control of that with their loss to the Cardinals last week. Giants, by the way, they lose. Commanders win. Cardinals win. Patriots win. All of a sudden, they're in play for that higher group of draft picks, if you will.
Really?
All the Cardinals, Patriots, Commanders all sitting at 4. Giants, part of a large team, group of teams that are sitting at 5. So that's what's on the line for them today, and what has ultimately been a fairly lost season.
Yeah, we should probably talk about this at some point, but just the Eagles and where that roster's at and developmental quarterbacks and paying quarterbacks. And I think their arc that they've been on the past couple of years, probably since 2020 when they lost that game against the Commanders to kind of help their draft stock, I think have been really interesting in terms of how they've built the team and where they're at now. So
definitely. Seahawks, Cardinals. Again, Cardinals kind of still in the mix for that number 2 pick, but they are behind on the tiebreaker. So if everybody loses today, they'll wind up number 4 behind Washington and New England. Seahawks, meanwhile, they do have a chance of getting in the playoffs, but it's not exactly a good one. They need – well, actually, no, it's not too bad. Seahawks win, Green Bay loss, and they're in. So they can get that wild card spot, which would be 3 teams from the NFC West in, by the way. L.A. already clinched, and San Francisco obviously has clinched as well. Chiefs and Chargers, not a lot on the line here. Chiefs are resting Mahomes. Travis Kelce needs, I think, 16 yards to get 1,000. So that would be a heck of an accomplishment for him this season. I can't remember the number, but that would give him one of the highest totals ever by a tight end. So Kelce chasing history again, probably get him some quick catches and get him out of the game. Rams 49ers, you got Wentz versus Darnold. Honestly, I'm kind of excited for the Sam Darnold San Francisco thing. I want to see how that dude does.
Are any of the starters playing, or is it only?
I doubt that there's many. McCaffrey is definitely out because he had the calf injury that he suffered last week. I would imagine that Debo and Trent probably aren't playing either. Kittle,
maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
but
the thing is about an NFL rosters, someone's got to play. Yeah. Although you can do more of that now with the practice squad. So you can call a bunch of guys up on a 1-week basis.
Correct. Yeah. So 2 good teams. Excited to see them in the playoffs.
Yep, we'll see you guys in San Francisco's case in a couple of weeks. And then for it all tonight, Bills and Dolphins. Man, this is going to be interesting. Tyreek Hill questionable, Jalen Waddle questionable, Raheem Mostert questionable. So can Miami get some of their guys back? And also, obviously, Bradley Chubb is down after the torn ACL last week.
And if they win, both these teams are in, right? Is that kind of how that works?
So, yeah, if the Bills win, both teams are in. The Dolphins have already clinched a playoff spot. Winner wins the AFC East. That is the only path in for the Bills. They win, they're in. They lose, and I do believe that they are out. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. They will know tonight, but
it's a really short.
Buffalo clinches a playoff berth with a win. Win and in, and then tie or Pittsburgh loss didn't happen. Jacksonville lost. So I guess if Jacksonville loses, I don't know how that works because now Pittsburgh screwed everything up because they won yesterday. So I think Pittsburgh is up in the order.
Right.
So
we're not.
Long story short, Buffalo wins and they win the AFC East.
So let's. I want good football teams to the playoffs, so maybe that happens. That'd be a lot of fun.
Do you think that if they get in, they're a legit super? I mean, obviously everyone that's in is on some level a legit Super Bowl contender. But how high up the list do you put them?
Yes. I mean, just because they have one of the most dynamic playmakers at the most important position in football, right? I mean, that feels a little bit different than if Seattle gets in, for example, or Pittsburgh. They just have so much offensive firepower. The defense is kind of getting healthy at the right time. It's just one of those teams where you don't want that headache. If you're a team, you just don't want to deal with Josh Allen. And the tremendous ability that he has. Like, he is literally he has the ability each and every week to be the best player in the NFL or the most volatile, and he's shown that. So I genuinely believe they are a team that can make a push for the playoffs with him at the helm.
By the way, speaking of Pittsburgh, I cannot believe that's a 10-win football team.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And the fact they're talking about firing Mike Tomlin is crazy.
I don't think that is real talk.
Yeah.
I think that is media silliness.
Yeah.
And I'm, it is. We're part of the media. Sometimes we can be a part of the silliness.
We talk silly stuff.
But that is beyond our level of silly. Mike Tomlin, as good as it gets in the NFL, 17 straight winning seasons, or non-losing seasons, I should say, for Tomlin. All right, that is our look around the NFL. When we get back, we'll take a look at the Commanders' defense and their matchup against a revamped Cowboys offense today. What has Mike McCarthy done that has helped flip this unit into one of the league's best? We'll take a look at that and the seasons of Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin next is the Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Got a touchdown for the Saints again. Rashid Shaheed with the score. Now New Orleans up 31-17. Again, that is a big game for the Commanders in terms of the number 2 overall pick. We will reset the stakes of that for everybody coming up at 4 o'clock. Also worth mentioning, we mentioned Travis Kelce very close to a milestone, but he is actually not going to play, so he is out today, and we'll count that as our inactive report. We'll get to the Commanders' inactives in a second, but before I forget, the injury report is brought to you by the Centers for Advanced Orthopedics. More physicians, more locations, more advanced care centered around one thing, you. Visit CFAortho.com for more. We also know that John Allen is out today. Kendall Fuller is out today. And actually now we do actually have the Commanders ones as well. Cam Curl, Andre Jones Jr., Andrew Wiley, Cole Turner, Jonathan Allen, Casey Toohill, and Jacoby Brissett is your emergency quarterback. Also worth noting, Daron Payne getting the C on his chest today, so congrats to 94 with John Allen out and some of the other guys out. It's kind of a cool thing for Daron to get that captain's C on his chest for the final game of this season. But I would say not surprised that these guys, all of whom were questionable, Curl, Wiley, Toohill, not playing today. Real rough look for Cole Turner, who just never got it going this year. And he's out today. Not really the best look for Andre Jones Jr. either, a guy who's helpful on special teams.
Is he hurt?
I don't think so, but I don't want to say for sure.
Right.
But with Casey out, you kind of would assume that maybe he would get the call up, but they've got some other guys that they brought in, your Josh Pryors, et cetera, who I guess will get their snaps over Jones today, the 7th round draft pick last fall. All right, or last spring, I should say. All right. Mike McCarthy this year was a guy that took over the offensive play calling, fired Kellen Moore as the OC, and everyone, including us, especially me, said, that is not going to go well. I am not scared of the Dallas Cowboys because I am not scared of Mike McCarthy, offensive coordinator. And Brian Schottenheimer was the guy he brought in to be the OC in terms of the name, McCarthy calling the plays. Those two have worked so well together this year. When you watch what they've done to transform that Dallas offense, what do you see that obviously the Commanders will deal with today, and maybe kind of take out of what you would like to see next year, kind of the transformation and what a coach should be thinking about in 2024 in the NFL offensively?
Well, I think it just shows you that they understand like who their playmakers are and what speaks to their quarterback. I think one of the things that Kellen Moore, people gave him a lot of credit for kind of being play action, motion, shifts. But I often felt like when you watch their offense, it felt a little bit stagnant. It's like deep comebacks, these deep outs. There wasn't a lot over the middle of the field. And I feel like they've changed that pretty dramatically here with Mike McCarthy. And it's not like anything overly complicated, but, it's slants, it's overs. There's some more seams, to the tight ends, obviously. And I think just finding something that speaks to what Dak understands and Dak does well, like that's good offensive play calling. That's what we were talking about earlier with EB. It's just kind of finding what your guy does and leaning into that. And I think it's also kind of knowing that you got a fairly elite piece. Is CeeDee Lamb a top 5 guy in the NFL? I think he's made a pretty good argument for that this year. But let's move around the formation a little bit. Let's make sure he gets good matchups. Let's get him on the nickel. Let's get him on a linebacker. Let's put him in a bunch. Let's get that free release. And sometimes, we talk about layups, just getting opportunities for the quarterback that are easy. And there's times where I'm like, that's an easy look for the quarterback. You've got your best player on a bad coverage player working from a stack. He's going to be open. I don't need to think about this too much. And so I think that's what you see. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like the old New England offense. It's nothing crazy. It's just you got a guy who can deal. You got a piece that can win in man-to-man situations, and a guy that if you give too much coverage to them, he can beat you in terms of Cook. So I think that's kind of what you see from this group, and it's pretty straightforward. It's not they're not reinvented the wheel. It's a quick game. They do some stuff off of play action, but it's not this. It's not rocket science, and I think that's the thing that's really beautiful about it. It's like that's what having a good quarterback does for you. It doesn't need to be rocket science.
And I think that's the thing that I take away when I think back to McCarthy in Green Bay. And I think a lot of people look at his time there and go, they should have won more, considering how good Aaron Rodgers was and how short they came in some playoff games. But I think like the overall overarching theme that drives the success is if you have great players, let them be great. Like put them in position to maximize their very, very high potential.
Yep.
Dak counts as that. Dak is not what Rodgers was, but like Dak's a very, very good player. And he did that very well with Devontae Adams and some other receivers. I mean, think of how many number one
Nelson,
receivers had big, big numbers up in Green Bay.
Yep.
And it's like, hey, who's our best guy? Let's get him the ball. And I think they've done a masterful job of that with CeeDee Lamb this year. As you said, moving him around, making sure he gets free releases, getting him good matchups. They do that as well as anybody does it with any player in the league.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. So when you say, like, what has he done, I think it's just kind of said, what does Dak do well? Let's do that. Let's kind of give him these nice, clean pictures, and let's make sure that our guy CD's in a good spot to win.
Yeah.
And that's what we're getting.
Yeah, and when your offensive line is
good
as theirs you can operate that way, and it shows you why the good thread in all the good teams pretty much is a great offensive line. Meanwhile, on the Commander side of it, defensively, I think this is a great challenge today for both Quan and Emmanuel Forbes. I think it's interesting. Benjamin St. Juste, I did not see on that inactive list, so
maybe he's playing.
Maybe he is going to play. But I would hope that Emmanuel Forbes lines up over CeeDee Lamb a lot, and then when he's in the slot, that Quan gets a shot at him. So a big challenge for the rookies today as they close out the year, trying to hopefully be on a high note.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's something we talked about on the Command Center show this week. With Fred. It's just that Quan's been that Buffalo nickel. He's drawn some tough matchups in there, and he's done a good job covering guys in there. And CD likes to work and operate in the slot. Or CeeDee Lamb, excuse me. And so I think just having a piece like this is, this is a piece like when you drafted him that I think you felt like he could do this, give you some flexibility to your defense, play this positionless football. He can play linebacker, he can play safety, he can cover a number one receiver. And so I think today is a really good litmus test to see like where his development's at. Because in terms of guys that we've been talking about on our review show each and every week, his name consistently comes up. And I don't think that's by chance. He's done a good job. So can he continue to develop? This is going to be a big market for him. And then a Forbes, I think, is another interesting one. Like when you talk to people around the building, like there is, and you hear John Keim talk about it, there's some frustration with some technique issues. Like, is this another data point that shows a progression there? I don't know. And is he going to play, or is St. Juste going to play? So really curious to see how those two guys specifically do in the back end. For first round pick, second round pick. I think the second round pick is progressing in a nice way. But I want to see some more miles from the guy in the first round. And it kind of goes back to that weird evaluation. A guy that was incredibly tough in college, incredibly physical, incredibly competitive in Quan, who seems to be kind of figuring out. And the big criticism of Forbes at the time was how tough and how physical can he be at the NFL level. And so interesting to see if that's going to be a fatal flaw for him.
For sure. And I don't know, there is this, someone is putting out a narrative that the issues for Forbes this year haven't been caused by his weight, and it's all technique based.
I think that's probably true.
I think that it's not all because of his weight, but I've just seen him get pushed around too many times where you just go, if he's thicker in the lower half, he's got a better base underneath him, he is going to not be pushed. Even if it's like at the top of a route, you get pushed off 2 yards and can break back versus 5 yards and get pushed back. Like, that matters. And I think it's been overly dismissed, and I wonder if it's people trying to put that out there that scouted him as oh, no, it's all the kid. He's not doing the techniques that we want. And I don't think that's realistic. The good news, I would say, though, is that better technique can help you overcome that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably also part of it. There is a real technique thing. And it sounds like from like what Keim said on his podcast that he knows that he's got to put on a little bit of weight. And maybe it's just regaining the weight he lost during the season, as happens with most players. But it is going to be now he knows what he needs to do in the NFL. He's got that rookie year experience. What does he do with the offseason is going to be critically important. And obviously the next staff will have a chance to talk to him and tell him what the expectations are going into next year.
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't think there's been a lot of like strictly coverage issues with him. I think when you watch his coverage snaps, you're like, okay, that's not bad. Obviously, there's the exception of the Philly game where he had a really tough time.
DJ Moore had a pretty good.
Yeah, but I think the thing I would point out there is that like there is a lack of physicality there in terms of tackling that showed up that wasn't there in his college film. There's stuff even in the last game where you're kind of like, why is he taking this angle to the runner? Like, why is he kind of running into the blocker as opposed to trying to defeat the block? And again, are those weight related? Are those mentality related? Those are the questions that I want to see answered. And I think that's the thing about this game is give him an opportunity to show you that he's progressing. And it's because again, I think his technique is relatively fine. You know, it's relatively fine. I think it's the other stuff like the angles in the run game, how you fit runs, are you contained on this play? That stuff I think is the stuff I want to see him just show some maturity in, show some growth in, and hopefully that gets resolved.
All right, real quick before we go to break, we'll come back, talk our pick 6, and then Grant Paulsen will join us at 3:30 from FedEx Field. The Jets still up 6-3 on the Patriots, which would mean if that game finishes that way, the Commanders need some help in terms of tiebreakers, and they would be getting it right now from the New Orleans Saints, who are up 31-17 right now over the Falcons late in the third quarter. We will obviously keep you updated as the day goes and how things are lining up for Washington and that number 2 pick and all the playoff implications on the line as well. With Logan Paulsen, I am Craig Hoffman. The Take Command pregame show here on the Team 980 continues with our pick 6 next. great action around the NFL right now. Justin Jefferson just found the end zone on a 4th and 1. Kevin O'Connell with a bleep it call. Play action shot from about 40 yards out. That is going to pull the Vikings within 1 score of the Detroit Lions, 20-12, extra point or 2-point conversion pending. So that is what's going on there. New Orleans up 31-17 after shutting down a drive in the red zone from the Atlanta Falcons. 4th down that went begging. New Orleans now trying to drive the length of the field and really close out that game early in the 4th quarter. Tampa up 9-0 on Carolina. Keep you updated on the rest of the score. Still 6-3 in New York, too, between the Jets and the Patriots. Of course, would love that score to flip for the Jets, because if the Patriots win today, the Commanders just have to lose, and they have the number 2 pick. No tiebreakers needed. With Logan Paulsen, I'm Craig Hoffman. This is the Take Command pregame show. Grant Paulsen will join us from FedEx Field coming up in about 15 minutes. But, Logan, we debated on the Hoffman Show on Friday doing a pick 6. It was like, we know that by Monday we're not going to be really talking about the game very much. There's going to be coaching news, et cetera, in Washington and around the NFL. So do we do one? And I looked at Anthony Haney and I said, you want to know what? We have to do one because we're going to need it on Sunday. We need Logan Paulsen's thoughts on 6 players who could impact the Commanders game today, or / the 6 players that we are watching in the Commanders game today. I guess it would probably help if I pull up the 6 players. I thought I copied and pasted that from one rundown to the other. That didn't happen. That's okay. But number 1 is the guy that we were just talking about on the show, and we were talking about more in the break as well, and that is Emmanuel Forbes. He's the most interesting guy to me on the field today. He's your first-round pick. He's had a very weird season in a lot of ways, and he could be matched up a lot with CeeDee Lamb. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, me too. And I'm really intrigued now because is he going to play? Like, if Benjamin St-Juste is active, like, how do you kind of –
Well, Kendall Fuller's out, so –
Oh, I catch him. Okay, yeah, there you go. So they're going to play.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again – I think he's done a good job in coverage. I just want to see a little bit more from him. I want to see a little bit more of that, like, kind of intangible stuff that you saw from him in college. I think that's the interesting thing about it is you saw him kind of be fearless, be physical, like talking a little bit of trash. Like, can he be that guy today? Because he's going to draw an extremely physical, because I think people sleep on how physical CeeDee Lamb is.
He is wiry strong.
He's physical at the catch point. He finishes runs. Like, you're going to have to tackle him. You're going to have to, like, work through contested catches. So I think this is going to be great litmus test for him.
For sure. By the way, touchdown Evan Ingram in Jacksonville, 28-20, Tennessee on top of Jacksonville. Jags need a win to win the NFC or the AFC South and make the playoffs. Number 2, Anthony's first pick was Terry McLaurin. He has got the 1,000-yard marker on the line today. He needs 54 yards to get it. How big of a deal is that, do you think, for Terry and for the locker room at large?
I mean, I don't know. It's obviously, like, if I was in the locker room and on the team with Terry, like, I'd want him to do something pretty special, I think, and for him to be able to set a franchise record in terms of receiving production over the first 5 years of his career. Is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of number of 1,000 yards receiving seasons, obviously with the extra game, that's a little bit different, but I think it's a big deal, and I think the coaching staff understands that's a big deal, and I think he's relatively well liked in the locker room, so it's about, like, making that happen for him. And obviously, in a game where there's not a lot necessarily to play for, there's not a lot necessarily going on, like, that's something I think you can prioritize if you're EB, if you're Ron, and get that done. So, yeah.
Yeah, a remarkable level of consistency for McLaurin. He had his best season in 2020, 87 catches, 1,100 yards that season. Last year, crossed that 1,100, almost got to 12. Had 77 catches each of the last 2 seasons. If he can get, 4 catches, 56 yards or so today,
right,
77 catches again, and then that 1,000. So just consistency. Also, when he plays today, gets out there, that will be 17 games, 3 straight seasons, something you don't get to see that often. So remarkable consistency from Terry McLaurin. Number 3 for me, my second pick was Quan Martin.
Yeah.
For, again, the same reasons we've kind of been talking about.
Yeah, and I think Quan is a guy, we've talked about him a lot. He deserves to be talked about a lot. He seems to be progressing in the right way, and he does seem as if he could be a piece moving forward, a piece that you can build around defensively. And I think that's something that's exciting. And in this season that's kind of lost You're looking for stuff like that. You're looking for, hey, man, is KJ Henry the guy? And I think Quan is very, I don't want to say definitively because I'm not there with him yet, but is asserting himself in that way. And he's showing that I can be this chess piece for the defense. And again, today we've talked about the challenges that the Dallas Cowboys are going to present from an offensive standpoint, a matchup standpoint. But again, a guy that I'm very excited about, physical, tough, competes, and has the athleticism that goes with that. I think is going to be really exciting to watch.
No doubt about it. Anthony's second pick, number 4 overall in our pick 6, was Eric Bieniemy. He's like, I haven't done it in a couple weeks. And it's
Did he do it last week?
I was like, didn't you do it last week? It's funny because we talked on our preview podcast this week about how if you're just looking at this game with blinders on, not in the context of everything this season, you're just like, okay, I'm the Commanders. I want to win this game. I would like to attack it in all your normal ways. You'd run the football based off what Dallas is showing, based off what you have been doing well the last couple of weeks. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Eric calls it today. We've seen coordinators make funny decisions in the past about play calling in the final game of a season where they don't anticipate keeping their job. You played in that game in 2013 with Kyle Shanahan.
It was a rough one.
But I am very curious to see how Eric approaches today. I tend to think that they will play it much straighter than the Shanahans did in 2013. But we'll see.
It'd be hard to tell the difference, though, I think, with him, with how often he throws the ball anyway, right?
They have run the ball more the last couple of weeks. Sam hasn't hit 40 attempts in a while.
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden there's a 50 burger today, I think it's that. Or honestly, I think there has got to be some small part of Eric Bieniemy, former running back Eric Bieniemy, that goes, you know what? All season they've told me run the football. I'm going to run it every snap.
That's what you're hoping for.
Honestly, yeah, I would love to be home for dinner tonight on a 425 kick.
Yeah, this is an interesting one by Anthony. It's interesting because what's EB going to do other than call the game? Like, this is a kind of a meaningless football game.
Results-wise.
You want to see, I guess you want to see him kind of maximize Sam in this game, which is something that I've wanted to see every single week. What does that look like? Is he running the football more? Is he throwing the football more? So that's kind of my thought on that. Like, how does he approach Sam's continued development? How does he approach kind of his offensive play calling identity?
For sure. By the way, touchdown Lions, bouncing
Great
back
play.
after giving up the.
Great play.
Yeah, I love that. They got a little high cross, hold the safety against cover 2, let Amon-Ra St. Brown sneak up the sideline. Love that. Love a good cover 2 beater. Number 5, Jahan Dotson. Dotson spoke up this week about the culture, and I think when you speak up, you get extra eyes on you. So, hey, Jahan, here are our eyes.
And he's another guy that we kind of in that Forbes category a little bit. Not like a bad year necessarily.
Not a good one, though.
Not as productive as we thought. Like how realistic are his opportunities? What does that look like with Jacoby? But again, there's some stuff where you're like, how competitive has he been each and every week? How has he been putting it out there? And in a game where, there's not a lot of, globally to play for from a team standpoint, what am I going to do as an individual to kind of assert myself in this game? I think it's going to be a really good indicator. Because one of the criticisms of him in college was that he wasn't the most physical guy. There were other more physical, more competitive receivers, despite his tremendous route running ability, despite his tremendous ability to catch the football. I think he has that in him. Can he show that today? And that's why this game, I think, is such a beautiful game. I said it was kind of meaningless. To me, this is a game where you see what a guy is truly made of and how important this game is. And, I've talked to talent evaluators. It's like, I will watch your last 3 games. Whether you're winning, whether you're losing, what do you look like? And I think this is a really awesome test for this team and guys like Jahan to say, hey, I want to be a part of the answer moving forward.
22 yards for Dotson today. He surpasses his season total from last year, which is interesting because he's already 12 catches more than he was last season. Last but not least, in our pick 6, Sam Cosmi, who just really to give a shout out to Sam Cosmi.
Yeah.
That dude's been awesome, and something that we'll definitely talk about on a podcast soon is the ability to remake this offensive line quickly.
Yeah.
Maybe you kick Riley in, you get Schomburg back at center, and all of a sudden you're cooking with a good draft pick and a good free agent signing. So Cosmi definitely a part of the future. He's been great this season.
Been absolutely fantastic.
When we get back, Grant Paulsen joins us from FedEx Field. We're finally under an hour from kick here on the Take Command pregame show. Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day. Less than an hour till kickoff in Landover. That is where we find Grant Paulsen, who joins us. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. GP, first and foremost, most importantly, congratulations, sir. Logan, I don't know if you know this, but 10 years of Grant and Danny this week.
Wow.
10-year anniversary. Congratulations, sir.
That's awesome.
That is very sweet of you, boys. Thank you. Yeah, so 4 years on the beat, 10-13 with Logie in the locker room.
Yeah.
Before that. So Logan and I go back, I guess, now, 14-plus years. We're getting old, man.
It is crazy to think about, for sure.
Yeah, it is. I can't believe, like, when I start talking about the teams I covered, like, we're getting close to almost 10 years in D.C. for me.
Yeah.
So that's – and I'm the newbie of the three of us to this town, so whatever that's worth. Logan did leave for a while. I don't know how that math works because I don't know how any math works. Here's what I do know, Grant. If the Commanders lose today, the Patriots win, or we get a couple of results, many of which are going Washington's way right now, they will wind up with the number 2 overall pick. How important do you think it really is to get that number 2 versus the number 3, which obviously is still on the table?
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, I don't think it'd be overstated how significant it would be for them to have the number 2 overall pick for 2 reasons. So the first one, before we even talk about who they might draft, is that, they are trying to sell themselves starting tomorrow morning to general manager and head coaching candidates. In fact, presumably behind the scenes for many, many weeks, they've been trying to sell themselves to GM candidates already. But having the number 2 overall pick is an unbelievable asset, along with 5 picks in the top 100 and the 3 in the top 45 that they're going to have in trying to convince an executive that they want to come here and run this football team. So I think what you're trying to do is kind of sweeten the pot as best you can. And for just the second time, really, since the year 2000, without having to trade up, to be picking in the top 2 would be a big-time opportunity for them as they're trying to land a GM. And it also makes it a lot more enticing for a head coach, especially if they end up trying to hire an offensive-minded head coach. You watch the film of Caleb Williams and Drake May, and you tell yourself that you end up possibly with one of those 2 guys. And that brings me to the second point, which is to say, if you're picking 2 as a team that doesn't have a quarterback, that has been searching one for nearly 30 years, the higher you pick, the better the chance that you can land a potentially great passer, which should be the number 1 goal of the next front office and the next coaching staff.
Yeah, and do you have any kind of thoughts on what you would do it to? I mean, obviously it's going to be quarterback, I would imagine, but do you think, is there anybody that's caught your eye kind of early in the process?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I inevitably, Logan, typically rely upon people that are scouts and smarter than me when it comes to talent evaluation. The limited amount that I've watched, which is to say a lot of college football this year, and I actually went back and watched a lot of Drake May over the last few weeks as it was trending toward them maybe moving up to number 2. I like Drake May. I think he reminds me a lot of Justin Herbert collegiately, to be honest with you. He's got all the physical traits and tools. He's big. It's a central casting frame. He's 6'4", about 220 pounds. He's got a big arm. He's athletic. He can be mobile. He can create and extend. He can scramble for some yards. He's almost got that kind of like Trevor Lawrence frame and mobility to him. So he's a central casting type passer. I mean, when I talk to people, though, around football, they still rave more about just the sheer physical tools of Caleb Williams. A lot of people think just from a sheer talent, athleticism, school standpoint, that he's ultra special. Kind of, I don't like using the word generational, but a once every several years kind of skill set. The question becomes, what kind of pro will he be? My only question about him really is, I think he's way better off schedule than on schedule.
Right.
And so I'd like to, someone smarter than me to be able to sit down and show me when he's on schedule, what some of the strengths are and the things that he does really well. But having said that, if you're in the number 2 range, I'm not trading back and I'm not doing anything other than quarterback. The question is, do you love one of the 2 and have to consider moving up to get that guy? I prefer not to. I think trading up almost never works. Or do you stand pat at 2 if you like the 2 comparably and just take one? What I can't abide, though, is any kind of thinking that this team that has been, roaming around in the desert without water for decades is going to now see a water fountain and say, we'll figure it out later. You don't pick top 2 often enough. Look back to 2020. When you're that high and you need a quarterback, you need to swing. People are afraid to swing and miss. You got to get in the batter's box. You can't win the lottery without a ticket. So I think if they're picking second, they'd be really making a huge mistake to move down the board.
So the devil's advocate argument to that would be if you are in love with Fashanu, with Marvin Harrison, with one of these other non-quarterbacks, and you really don't think the quarterback is that good, whoever's available to you. Let's say you loved Williams, but the Patriots trade 3 firsts to Chicago, and you're like, I'm not doing that. You got to get in the batter's box and swing eventually, but at the same time, if you swing and miss, and you could have hit a double somewhere else, so now you've cost yourself a man on base. Torturing the baseball analogy enough, like when you look at Mahomes and some of these other guys that have been mid-first, early second, but have a good roster around them, you don't think that's a viable option. You're like, screw it. Hey, I'll live with swinging and missing versus any other option.
Well, look, I mean, there's no doubt you can hit on a quarterback outside of the top 2. To your point, almost all of the best quarterbacks in the league right now, or the ones headed to the playoffs in the MVP conversation this year, were not drafted in the top 2. But I'm not sure that's the best way to look at it as much as like the percentage chance of guys hitting where you take them. So in other words, if we're talking Mahomes, back into the top 10, like what is the batting average there versus at number 1 versus at number 2? Someone will point out Purdy was a 7th rounder, or Brady was a 6th rounder, or Dak's a 4th rounder with Cousins, or Wilson's a 3rd rounder. And that's all true. It's not to say you can't hit on a QB there.
Sure.
But the batting average in the 7th round is probably like .005. And in the 6th round it's probably 100. And in the 5th round it's probably 105, right? Whereas in the top 2, you're much closer to batting 500. So I just think the higher you do it, the more likely you're going to get it right, number 1. But the last thing I'd say about that is your point's well said, which is if they don't like the quarterback, you shouldn't just take one to do it. I just think there's enough here. You should be able to like one of these guys. They're different, right? Drake May is kind of your traditional pocket passing, big physical presence. Caleb Williams, who's an athlete at the position. Michael Penix, who's cool with some size. Like there's enough of a grab bag here that I think you got to find a way to like one of them, frankly. And look, you could draft Fashanu, or you could draft Alt at left tackle, or Harrison at wide receiver. And all around this league, there's exceptional players at those positions that never win. Ask Joe Thomas in Cleveland what it's like to be the best tackle in the league and a first-ballot Hall of Famer without a quarterback. The whole game is to have a QB that gives you a chance every single week. And when you pick second, they did it in 2020. And I was sitting here, I remember it. They took Chase Young instead of Herbert or Tua, who's doing fine now, and they paid for it since. I just don't think they should make the same mistake again with their first pick of a new regime like they did then.
Yeah, I think it's. I think the new regime thing is also super important, but also I think it'll be really interesting to see, because I do think, I think trading back is a viable thing here if you believe the guy, because I do think like the Daniels kid, the Penix kid, like they'll be in that kind of mid-first round, and if the difference between Drake May and them is not enough, and you gain an extra roster spot or an extra draftable player, I think you're just giving yourself more bites at the apple. Now we're getting really into like some subjective waters here.
Yeah, Logan, don't ruin our podcast for the next 4 months. Good gracious.
Yeah, because it's all about like how you evaluate those guys and who does what. And again, like this is an offensive line class that's insanely deep, so it's like there's a lot of variables here that need to be considered. But I do agree, kind of with the premise.
One thing to that real quick.
For sure.
I actually agree with you, and I love that point.
Yeah.
I will say I just asked someone this week about this who's super plugged in the NFL on like how the draft may work, and we're a long ways away.
Yeah.
But I asked them, I said, hey, like comfortably speaking, because I kind of like that idea too. Let's say when they go through their eval, they don't think the difference between May and Jaden Daniels is that huge, or we don't even know who they're going to hire as a head coach.
Right.
Let's say the coach they bring in here is absolutely themed up for Jaden Daniels or Michael Penix or whatever, and you can get that guy 10 or 20 picks later, you think. But the question, my point, how far can you trade down and be pretty confident that one of those other guys doesn't go in front of you? And their point was probably not that far, because quarterbacks always get pushed up the board.
Right.
They're always going to get overvalued as we get closer. A guy like Daniels running around in shorts all offseason is going to shine. Penix is only probably going to go up, not down, as this process begins. So let's say they trade down hypothetically to like 9 or 10. What if both of those guys go in front of you?
Yeah.
Now you move down because you had an eye on a quarterback.
And I think I'm talking about trading down to like 6. Just picking up another spot there. But yeah, you definitely, that's part of the deal, right? Is you're picking at 2, you ensure the player that you want there, which I think is like what we're talking about.
That's my concern. Like if your end game is to take a quarterback, then like, I'd love to have my cake and eat it too, and pick up a couple picks. And if they could pull it off, home run, that's the way to do it, no doubt. We've seen it, and it helps teams like Chicago or whoever's been able to bring in the King's ransom. But just hypothetically, let's say it's Jaden Daniels. They want to move down and get a 6.
Yeah.
You just take him at 2, because if you move down to 6, and then the Giants take him at 5, hypothetically, and now you're playing him twice a year, like, did that work out?
Right.
You know, I just think that at quarterback, if they love someone enough that they're targeting him on a move back, if you're only talking about moving back a handful of picks, you should probably just take him and make sure you get him.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely feasible. I will say something that is nice is that second-round pick from the Bears, having an extra second could help you move. You know, you trade back and then you trade back up. There's all kinds of stuff. Who knows? Draft night always gets wild. It's in April, and we got from now until then to be talking about that. Last game of the regular season, of course, today at FedEx Field. Grant Paulsen is there. GP, as we wrap up here, I am coming, so please keep the rooster in his singular seat if you could.
It is too late for that, but I will tell him to make some adjustments.
Okay.
Before you get over here.
Be nice to the rooster, guys. Huh? What do you think?
We are being nice to the rooster. We're asking very nicely. And, I've heard the Roosters radio show. He very much values people making adjustments.
He's a big fan of adjustments in game. So
yeah.
He'll have to make a couple of his own. But, yes,
Excellent.
we are ready to go. Commanders wearing their classy white on white. Cowboys navy blue on some silver. We got ourselves an aesthetically pleasing rivalry matchup today here at FedEx Field.
Love to see it. We'll see you over there in a little bit. Thanks for joining us all season long. And, again, congrats to you and Danny on a heck of a first decade together on 106.7 The Fan.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, bud.
All right, Grant Paulsen, again, catch him 2 to 6:30 with Danny Rouillet weekdays on The Fan and the free Odyssey app. When we get back here on the Team 980, and, of course, that same free Odyssey app, we will get you caught up with the scores around the league as we enter the witching hour here on the final day of the NFL's regular season. Take Command pregame show on a Burgundy and Gold game day on the Team 980. Also streaming live on YouTube, where if you're watching, yes, we have reached the standing portion of the
show. That's exactly right.
This is how you know we're in the home stretch. Logan and I ditch the chairs that we've been sitting in for close to 3 hours and decide it is time to stand and remind you that he is 6'5". I guess I just remind people of that so they don't think that I'm 5'2". Not that there's anything wrong with that. Okay, so here's what we got going around the NFL right now. We got the witching hour underway, as they call it over on NFL Red Zone.
Sure.
And you got one game that's already done, by the way, and that is a big one because the Buccaneers shut out the Panthers 9-0. Carolina finishing their season 2-15. Tampa finishing 9-8. And for the third straight year, champions of the NFC South. So that is done and dusted.
Yeah, good for them, huh? Good for Baker. You know?
Yeah.
Nice to see him making.
Today was not particularly good for Baker, but
I'm saying that he made the playoffs, that he's kind of righted the ship. He's had a productive year. You know? So.
Yeah, no, I've always liked Baker. I liked him as a prospect coming out. I remember watching him in the Senior Bowl. I mean, that was one of my first years doing the Senior Bowl thing. And I think that, one of the things that was really interesting that year is when he got to Mobile, the whole energy changed of the week. Yeah. And he didn't wind up doing a whole lot. I don't even know if he wound up playing in the game.
Right.
But he
Which they rarely do, yeah.
He practiced a couple of days, and you just go, oh, my God. Like, this guy, the leadership element that he had, I think, was just so fantastic. And I was really, really impressed with him and getting to watch him throw live, seeing the ball fly out of his hands. And you're like, okay, this dude's going to be the number one pick. And he sure enough was, obviously very up and down in Cleveland. But you see him put it together. Again, today's not a particularly great performance, but overall put it together. And I think the other thing to watch outside of Baker and the obvious most important thing pressing-wise, like they're in the playoffs, they're going to host a playoff game, is Dave Canellis is all of a sudden a name, their offensive coordinator, who is going to be probably getting some head coaching interviews.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And huge, it took him a while to figure it out, but offensively, kind of mentoring a quarterback who had been on the rocks for a little bit, finding a way to maximize playmakers. I haven't watched a ton of their games in terms of breaking down the All-22, but they've been very productive this year offensively. And comparing it to last year, it's nice to see that transition, and great they're in the playoffs.
I think Tampa's an interesting one, too. They have in their past fired a defensive head coach to hire an OC that was going to get hired away. That did not work out with Dirk Cutter being the head coach. I would hope that they don't repeat that mistake with Todd Bowles, but if Canellis is going to get hired away, that is certainly possible. 9-8, not exactly the best season, but probably enough for Bowles to keep his job in Tampa. Meanwhile, I do believe that makes the game that we have been watching most today, the Saints and Falcons, irrelevant in terms of playoffs. Let me double check that real quick. Yeah. So with Tampa winning, New Orleans eliminated from winning the NFC South. They can, as they wrap up their win right now, they're up 41-17 with 3 minutes to go, get in with a Seattle loss. So Seattle loses, Seattle loses and Green Bay loses. So New Orleans will be dependent on those two games this afternoon. The Falcons have already been eliminated. Their only way in was to win the NFC South, which would have required Tampa losing. But I think more importantly, locally, New Orleans winning is a double whammy, excellent outcome for the Commanders, because the Commanders face the Falcons this year, actually one of their wins. The Patriots face the Saints. And so by Atlanta losing, that hurts Washington's strength of schedule, which helps them in the tiebreaker, does the opposite for New England, and thus Washington in good shape going into their game against the Cowboys on that front.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so good job. New Orleans figuring it out, helping the draft position, which is always important and kind of what everybody's caring about at the moment. So.
Meanwhile, of course, that's only if the tiebreaker is needed, which right now it would be, because the Patriots are losing to the Jets 9-3 in what we all expect will be Bill Belichick's final game. However, they do have the ball.
Yeah.
And they are driving. So they are 2nd and 8 at their own 43 with the ball. It has been a miserable day offensively in New England. Bailey Zappi is 9 for 25 for 65 yards.
27.9 passer rating.
Yeah, he has been sacked a bunch of times to the point that they have 16 team passing yards.
That's a tough deal, man. Don't like that stat line.
Not very good. Meanwhile, Trevor Siemian, the better quarterback today, is 8 for 20 for 70 yards, Logan.
Yeah, not a lot to say about this game. Hopefully,
Hopefully Zappy can whip up a win here.
Yes.
Although it looks like they might have just actually turned the ball over. So let me see if I can confirm that. That's the one game that's not on a TV close to us right now. So it's way over there in the distance.
Yeah.
It looks like the Jets were celebrating. But no, I think they've maintained the ball. So we will obviously keep you updated on that. Jags and Titans. Titans looking to close it out and play spoiler. If the Titans win this game, which they're up 28-20, they have the ball right now, Jacksonville would be out of the playoffs. They would lose the AFC South.
Wow.
And the Houston Texans, who won last night, would be your AFC. They're already in, but they would be your AFC South champions. And Houston, in a year where everyone thought they were going to be terrible, will host a playoff game.
That's unbelievable, and it's such a disappointing year for Jacksonville. I mean, I think with all the talent they have, kind of the Trevor Lawrence looking like he kind of figured it out last year, especially in that playoff when they had
Feels like
against.
He's been snake bitten this year.
Yeah, well, it's someone I explained this perfectly. Everything looks hard for Jacksonville. They make everything hard. There's no easy throws. They ask them to do a lot. I think that's exactly right. And I think you saw that today. He made some excellent plays, found some good one-on-one matchups, but again, it's too challenging for them. They need to kind of reevaluate that offense and reevaluate who they want to be defensively too, because they obviously defensively they're struggling a little bit today too.
No doubt. Browns and Bengals. Cincinnati going to win this one. 30 seconds left in the game. Bengals will finish the season above 500, which is pretty remarkable, all things considered. 31-14 over Cleveland, who rested a bunch of guys going into the playoffs. And then you got the Lions going to close out with another win. They will finish the season 12-5. They just had an interception to seal it, basically. They're up 10 now with 3:07 to go, 30-20, despite a monster day. 12 catches, 192 for Justin Jefferson.
Also a big day for Nick Mullins. And again, kudos to the Vikings, man, and that whole coaching staff there, keeping those guys motivated, keeping them competitive, not a lot to play for, just playing spoiler, really. And they came out and gave
had a
Detroit
Hail Mary shot at the playoffs. But
gave Detroit everything that they had. So.
Yeah, 391 for Mullins on the day in what will ultimately be a Vikings loss. All right, that is what else is going on around the NFL. When we get back, we will recap kind of the top stories of the day for the Commanders, and I'll give you your rooting interests, and you can see actually if this has been locked up at this point in terms of who the Commanders needed to win the tiebreaker or lose the tiebreaker, if you will, for the number 2 pick with the Patriots. That is next, and then we got our game picks and our final difference maker of the game of the season. Logan, better start putting your thinking cap on now. 25 minutes to go here on the Take Command pregame show. Final half hour of the season of the Take Command pregame show. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen on the Team 980, streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 and 106.7 The Fan, and also live on the free Odyssey app. So we have some more final scores, some more final everythings for today, and some of which are impactful on the Commanders. One good, one bad, Logan. The Jets have finished off the Patriots, or I should say are in the final seconds, but they're now up 15-3. That Bailey Zappi drive that we said had some promise after 2 plays, that was the end of the promise. He got picked. The Jets then handed the ball to Breece Hall twice. On the second of those carries, he went 50 yards for a touchdown. So that is the end of that. However, on the tiebreaker front, so that was the chance for, if the Patriots won and the Commanders lose, coming up at 4:25, number 2 pick is Washington. So that was the easy way. The harder route was getting help. The good news is they have gotten the help that they needed. Going into the day, you needed or going into the weekend, I should say, you needed, I would say, we'll call it 3 points. This will make sense in a second, Logan.
Right.
3 points out of the following games, and a point for a win except for one of them. You needed Pittsburgh, Baltimore, you needed Pittsburgh. Houston, Indy, you needed Indy. Atlanta, New Orleans counted for 2 points. You needed New Orleans. Chicago, Green Bay, Denver, Vegas. You needed Green Bay and Vegas. Well, Pittsburgh obviously won yesterday.
Yep.
There's 1 point. Houston beat Indy, so nothing there.
No.
But New Orleans beat Atlanta. That's 2 points for Washington. That's it. That's all. Washington loses today, even though New England lost. That will be enough for the Commanders to have a worse strength of schedule, thus win the tiebreaker and get the number 2 overall pick in the draft.
If they lose.
If they lose.
Yeah. Well, that's good, right? I mean, that's the whole point of today, right? We wanted to set up an opportunity to control our own destiny in a matter of speaking, I suppose. And
yes.
It's always good to pick a little bit higher. And we talked to Grant a lot about why that's important. So I think, yeah, good to be bad, I guess.
In this particular case, I mean, it would have been good to be good, but that ship sailed a long time ago.
Yeah.
I'm just happy that I got to the point in the weekend that I could explain that rather cleanly.
That was really good, actually. Yeah, it was very clean. The point thing made a lot of sense. Great job by you.
Excellent. Someone's got to get a win here in D.C. this season. Meanwhile, real quick, before we get back to the Commanders and Cowboys, we've been talking about some of the other jobs that may open because obviously you're going to be competing with those places for head coaches. Did Arthur Smith lose his job today?
It kind of felt like maybe. I know in watching the game, obviously very competitive, but it kind of felt like at some point you're looking for a team to kind of round the corner, like turn the corner. What I mean by that is I think Atlanta's a good team. They got a good defense. They got a solid offense. They got a lot of playmakers, a lot of weapons. And when you just watch them, they just never were able to kind of flesh out a consistent way to maximize the playmakers. You saw flashes, obviously. Obviously, that's a big quarterback component, so that's why I think they're a perfect.
Enormous quarterback component.
That's why I think Justin Fields for them would be a perfect fit. But again, like how frustrated are you with as the owner, or how frustrated are you with him and his production the last couple of weeks, and that there wasn't that transition? You weren't able to find something that spoke to Desmond Ridder and his skill set and win a division that's not very good.
I mean, they did try to bench him, and then Taylor wasn't exactly good, and then Taylor Heineke got hurt. So it's not like he just,
But if I'm local media there, I said those are decisions that you've made, Arthur Smith. You've made those decisions. That's the quality of backup, all those different things. So, but yeah, I think I like Arthur Smith. I like what he's doing there. I like the philosophy. I personally wouldn't fire him, but it depends about where you think he is in relation to that locker room and can he maximize that group. Like I said, I wouldn't fire him, but I think that if I'm a local Atlanta fan and if I'm the owner of the Falcons, I might be thinking about going in a different direction.
Yeah, it's really rough. They've lost 4 of 5 to close the season, and they also had a pretty hideous win over the Carolina Panthers in a 9-7 game.
Loss,
yeah. They lost by 20 last week to Chicago, and you also have a game where you're tied at 17 at the half and lose 48-17 with a playoff spot potentially on the line. Obviously, it wound up that they wouldn't have gotten the help they needed, but in a must-win game. And Desmond Ridder, part of it to me is like how in was he on Desmond Ridder? Because if you thought Ridder was your guy, I don't trust you to pick another quarterback because Desmond Ridder has been about as bad of a top 3 round quarterback that's gotten like real playing time the last decade that I can remember. He has been bad, man.
Yeah, and I think you're hoping that the scheme there would have insulated him.
Right, and it's different than a guy like what Howell has done this year, where like Howell was asked to do a bunch. Ritter's not asked to do much, and he can't do that.
Yeah, and it's just like when the interceptions comes, like how catastrophic the mistakes are. Huge, and again, he's a young football player, and maybe there's an argument there that he showed some of the high stuff was good, but again, like they're probably in the market for a quarterback, much like Washington is. But I go back to like, did that team evolve? Did that team grow? Did the offense progress with him as your offensive coordinator? Again, I like what they're doing. I think it's the right approach, but it might be enough of a frustration for the people making the decisions that they got to move on.
I also wonder, like how attractive is that job compared to some of the other ones?
I would assume it's pretty attractive.
Yeah,
I mean,
they got some good defensive players. They got obviously great skill position guys. They need a quarterback, so that is always something to consider. But definitely a job that's competitive and a franchise that's had some success. So the owner will invest and cares a lot, and great facilities as well, as you well know, considering played there.
Yeah.
All right, Washington and Dallas today. What to you is the most important thing, the biggest storyline today?
Well, I think everybody's going to talk about losing the game, and I think there is some relevance there. But for me, it's really just to see young talents and how the whole roster competes. And I know a lot of people probably don't think it's that important, but you want it. One of the things that I think back to that Philly game in 2020, right, when they kind of lost, they looked terrible.
Yeah.
I remember going that offseason thinking, man, they are so far away from being good.
Philly, you're talking
Philly.
about.
They're so far away from being good. Like, I don't know what they're going to do for the next 3 years. But the nucleus of that roster was a bunch of really competitive guys, and they were able to add a couple pieces here and there and then make it work for them. And I think that's something that I want to see today is how much do we really need, does the new coach, new ownership need to add to this roster to make sure that it is competitive next year? I think they're a quarterback away for sure. Are they a quarterback away, or what are the other pieces that need to be in that kind of wish list of position? And then how do we go about acquiring them? And is it a 1 year vision, a 2 year vision? Because I think if they go out and they show that they're a competitive, tough bunch of guys, and there's a couple, we can sign a right tackle and bump Wiley into guard. Maybe Cornelius Lucas shows us enough that he could be the left tackle in a holdover. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You get Stromberg back, the offensive line's patched up for a little bit. Like that type of thing, those types of decisions are not made solely on this game, but they definitely factor in like how competitive, how tough this team looks today.
So one of the questions that I have is there anything Sam Howell can do in Week 18 to kind of change his future trajectory? We'll answer that next, give you our difference makers of the game, and wrap up the final, the season finale, if you will, of the Take Command pregame show next on a Burgundy and Gold game day. final segment of the season on the Take Command pregame show with Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman, but have no fear. The Take Command podcast is going nowhere all offseason long. We'll be with you 2 times a week in the offseason on the podcast, talking about everything that's going to happen. Logan will still join the radio show for me, of course, the Hoffman Show here on the Team 980, 4 to 7 daily. Anything else from a housekeeping standpoint we should let people know of?
No, just our draft coverage is going to be pretty on point. We're excited for that. And then,
And then we probably are not going to do a post-game stream tonight. That post-game live stream kind of doubles as our podcast for Monday morning. And, by the time that comes out Monday morning, I don't think there'll be much to talk about. So about this game, obviously, everything is going to be about the franchise moving forward and whatever happens with Ron Rivera, which we likely know what is happening, and obviously anyone else, any other changes that are announced Monday for the Commanders. Other than that, Logan, congrats to the Steelers and the Bills, who with the Jacksonville loss have clinched playoff spots, so the AFC is pretty much done. We'll see what happens in the NFC tonight. And, of course, the seedings will change based off the Buffalo-Miami game this evening. That one, the AFC East on the line. All right, so with all of that said, final pieces of business for the Commanders this season. Is there anything Sam Howell can do today to really change his fortune, you think, with this franchise moving forward?
I mean, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I mean, I think it would have to be something. I mean, even if he goes out and has 400 yards receiving and 400-yard passing and 5 touchdowns, I think you look back at the last 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks, and say that was a pretty rough stretch for him, and it gives you enough pause and enough doubt that you say, well, we definitely still got to look at quarterback with that second overall pick potentially, and I think that's ultimately what it boils down to. It's like he was in a position earlier, probably kind of through that week 9-10 area where it was his. He had it. He just needed to kind of finish the year out and not even play great, just play with some level of consistency, and he just wasn't able to do that. And I think that's, again, enough of a blemish for a guy that the organization doesn't have enough invested in to say, hey, we got to look someplace else.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it comes down to this. The things that we thought were concerns for Sam coming into the year wound up being legitimate, and they never really got better. Yeah. And that's I think, the ultimate death knell for him.
And I think fans say, oh, well, like, he did all this good stuff. And I think they were hidden for a while, right? They were still there. When we do our film breakdowns, we talk about how he's taking pressure, not throwing with anticipation, but he was doing enough other good stuff that made you forget about it. And he needs to do that other stuff better. And I think we just saw, like, what this offense and what the NFL does to quarterbacks that don't do those things well, don't throw with a lot of anticipation, don't throw with great accuracy at all times. And I'm not saying you can't get better in those areas, but I don't think the team has any responsibility to kind of ferry that development any longer. And I think he'll be part of the organization.
Yeah,
I think he's
like,
part of
he'll
the team.
develop. It just won't be as the starting quarterback. But I think he instantly becomes one of the better backups in the league.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately, if you have a 5th-round pick and a really good backup quarterback, like, it's not a bad use of a 5th-round pick, even if it's not the miracle that I think a lot of us were hoping for and thought was possible based off some early results this season. Also, some of that hope came from the fact that he destroyed the Eagles a couple times, and turns out they're not very good defensively.
Yeah.
All right, our difference maker of the game is how we wrap things up. It's presented by Zips Cleaners. Zips Cleaners knows that looking good makes all the difference, whether on the field, on the job, or wherever life takes you. At just $3.29 or less per garment, we make it easy and affordable to look your best. Find a Zips Cleaner near you at zipscleaners.com. Logan, as we wrap up from Tap Sports Bar here at MGM National Harbor, one final difference maker of the game of the season.
Yeah, so I think for me it's probably, and there's a couple ways you could go with this. One, I think the guy who's going to play the best is probably going to be Sam Cosmi. So does that make him a difference maker? I don't know. The guy that I'm most excited to watch, we've talked about, is Quan Martin, Emmanuel Forbes, because I want to see those guys play well. But in terms of actually impacting the game on a down-and-down basis, I'm going to have to go with a guy like B-Rob. B-Rob and Gibson, I think, in the backfield. I'd like to see them get more opportunities to run the football. B-Rob, every time he touches the ball, while he's not always maximizing runs, is playing physically, is shown to be kind of a dynamic, explosive playmaker. I want to see him get more involved, and I think he's probably going to have the biggest impact on the game.
My difference maker of the game will be... Oh, man, this is tough.
It's tough, man.
It's tough.
Terry McLaurin.
Guys. I could go Terry. He's going to get that 1,000 yards. Part of me wants to go Deron Payne. Shout out to him. He's got the captaincy on his chest.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So congrats to him. You know what? He's one of the best dudes I've ever met in the league. I'm just going to go my guy Terrell Burgess on the back
There you
end
go.
today.
Yeah, that's your
Burge,
guy.
he was a guest on Trust Way's podcast this week.
Yep.
He's a great
Hang
dude.
time.
Yeah, he's just an A+ dude who's actually played pretty solid ball the last couple weeks. No Cam Curl today. So, Terrell, you're the last line of defense, buddy. Hope you have a good day today. Because they actually have shut things down on some of the coverage bus. Dissipated, and had none last week. Of course, there's other ways that San Francisco scored. Dallas fully capable, but we'll see what happens today. That's how we wrap it up for the Take Command pregame show on the 2023-24 season. We will see you for a Take Command podcast early on in the week, reacting to whatever happens tomorrow. Of course, I'll have full coverage as part of our team coverage on the radio starting at 4 here on the Team 980. You got Sunday Night Football tonight here on the Team 980. You got Maryland Hoops coming up at the top of the hour. And other than that, Fox Sports Radio will take you until then. For Logan Paulsen, I'm Craig Hoffman. We're off to FedEx Field. Thanks for listening all season long to the Take Command